Evolution is false. Prove us wrong by debating us live. Now, Sam, by evolution, we don't mean change over time. We agree things change over time. Our thinking processes change over time. Cars change over time. Our cell phones change over time. No, by evolution, what we are challenging is that kind of evolution that says you are related to ladybugs, grass, chimpanzees, whales, and pine trees. And so now is your chance to the critics in our live chat on YouTube, but also the hundreds and hundreds of critics, or I should say, keyboard warriors that we get on Facebook. So this is the first of many in a series where Sam and I will be here live, giving you the opportunity to join us and engage us in debate and discussion, offering your best evidence and arguments for atheism, evolutionism, and naturalism. Sam, my award-winning co-host, the debate champ, the atheist worst nightmare. What's going on, brother?
Hey, not much. I'm excited for tonight. I was just sitting around thinking, tonight's a great night. It's a great time to be a biblical creationist. And it's a great night tonight to engage with some critics.
Yeah. Amen. It's always a great time to engage with some critics. You and I, we just recently did a marathon formal debate on the question, does genetics support creation or evolution? We did it over on Modern Day Debate. Tons of fun. We debated good old Dr. Ron Garrett and Crash Out, First Amender. Good time, Sam. And so for those in the audience who haven't yet seen that one, definitely check that one out. Sam and I have another formal debate coming up on July 23rd. Adam and Eve existed. And so we are taking the affirmative there. And I can't wait. We'll be debating the Kentucky Atheist and Austin Sims. So the point of that is these act like training prep sessions. We want to see the best arguments. We want to see your best lines of evidence. It'll help us to dig deep, engage with the critics, and act as some pretty good sparring sessions, I think, for the upcoming formal debates that we've got. So, Sam, I want to kick it off by asking you, brother. You gave the first part of, just looking at our live chat here, One God is Now Here. Good to see you, brother. Appreciate that. Like, share, and subscribe. Of course, when it comes to these live open mic challenges, 99.999% of evolutionists are keyboard ninjas, keyboard warriors. So at times we may not have any evolutionists to debate. And so for that, for those portions, we'll be taking audience questions, audience arguments, and challenges. I will post the StreamYard link in just a second. So good to see everybody. Send in your questions if you have them. Send in your points for us to engage. So Sam, you gave the first part of our opening statement for that debate. You laid out an excellent case, set the foundation. Now, you pointed out, I should say we've pointed out that your arguments in the opening statement, that includes mine as well, they went untouched, unaddressed.
Yes.
We put out a video last night of our opening statement. We had some commenters, some keyboard warriors coming in and leaving their thoughts. So I want to ask you, Sam, take your time, brother. My question is, why have the points in your opening statement, or the aspect of the opening statement that comprised you, how come those have been unaddressed, brother?
Donnie, I don't think there is actually a good response to that argument. Before I do, though, I just got to ask you. So that was my first formal debate. I debate informally, regularly. I'm on TikTok pretty regularly, and here, hopefully, whenever you do your open mics. But you've done many debates. Have you ever driven someone to drink? I mean, First Amender, we literally drove him to drink, and that's not a joke. He's middle of the debate. He just stood up and started taking big sips off a hard bottle of alcohol. What happened?
That may be in over 100 formal debates that I've done, countless, I would say hundreds of informal open mic discussions, lost count there. That might be one of the first times we've seen a live crash out to that extent, especially in a formal debate. But I guess it's inevitable when you believe you're related to grass, when you believe everything, including time, matter, and space, came from nothing. And 4 to 5 billion years ago, non-living chemicals, Sam, somehow managed to evolve and work themselves into the first self-replicating molecule. It's a lot of imagination, as we like to say. Evolutionists hope, dream, and imagine that they're related to grass. And so I think a crash out was inevitable, because what else can you do when you're being challenged with real empirical scientific evidence, Sam?
Yeah, I don't know. So I ran there's so many good arguments for Christianity. The cosmic skeptic, although I believe he's changed his name now, he said that you could make an argument based off of just the sheer amount of arguments that there are for Christianity. So, I wasn't sure which one I was going to use in that debate. So I made an argument that undermines one's cognitive abilities. And I did that intentionally because I'm a fan of the transcendental argument. I love that argument, but I just wanted to see how well the critics were paying attention. So I didn't, in fact, run the transcendental argument. Instead, I ran an argument by an evolutionist, believe it or not. So that argument that I ran comes from a few evolutionists. And so I cited Patricia Churchland. She is an atheist, philosopher of science. And I also did that intentionally. So when the critics come back and they want to say poo-poo on me, I'm just pointing to your own camp. I mean, don't shoot the messenger here. But the argument there is that evolutionary processes select for some sort of survival value. And truth wouldn't be one of those things that it selects for. As long as your thoughts have some survival value, then evolutionary processes will select for those. So you could believe something that's entirely false. And if that false belief somehow increases your survival value, then evolution is going to select for it. So what I did is I undermined one's probability of relying on their cognitive faculties. And I pointed out that the collateral damage from that debate would be all of one's belief, their belief in the world that there is no God, which I would love for somebody to come up and challenge us on that tonight, their belief in evolution, atheism, and really everything altogether. And I didn't get anyone to engage with that. You recently uploaded our opening statements, which was neat. I did get one critic come and just gaslight me, is all he did, telling me how there's all kinds of responses. And I let him know that we're going to be here tonight and he can show up. He says, no, he doesn't want to do that. I said, well, you can engage with the argument if you're so learned and you know that it's been refuted. Instead of,
and you're saying he did turn down your challenge?
Well, I mean, are you surprised?
Not surprised at all.
I'm not surprised. Hey, look, I do this regularly on other platforms, and there are many hostile Christian platforms out there, which it's disappointing. There shouldn't be. This isn't that hostile here. There's really no excuse for somebody to not come up and have a cordial, mature-minded conversation with us tonight. But no, he wasn't willing to do that. So I said, well, maybe you'll just provide one of those responses to my argument and we can engage with it. And he wasn't willing to do that either. So that's strange.
Well, it's strange for many reasons. One reason is they're the ones, and I'm looking at a comment on our Facebook page. It's so funny. The Facebook post that I published that says evolution is false and creation is true. Bring your best arguments and debate us live. And we got a lot of comments from the keyboard warriors, a lot of them keyboard Karens. And I'm responding to them saying, like this one guy here, Sean Nippard, he's talking about how 98% of the scientific community believe that essentially they're related to whales and pine trees. That must be Dr. Ron Garrett there, pretending to be someone else. Because that was his main argument.
I think that was his main point.
It was. I mean, if that's convincing to somebody, that's pretty sad. And so I said, why the rant? He leaves this big wall text. Why the rant? Come debate. this is your chance. And so that's what we get. And why it's strange, Sam, for many reasons, but one that comes to mind is they're so confident that the science tells us that common descent is true. The earth and universe are 14 to 15 billion years old, the earth being 4 to 5 billion years old. The Bible's false. Naturalism is true. But why are so few actually confident enough to defend their science fiction religion in an arena where they can't dodge? Because in comment section, Sam, we get a lot of what? Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. It's difficult to hold keyboard warriors accountable for their dodging. But in live cross-examination, well, now we get to hold their feet to the fire in Christian love, of course, as you said, Sam.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I even had Dr. Garrett, to be fair, he said he wanted to have a conversation about, my opening statement, and some of the question and answer was great. That was a good time, I thought. And so I joined him on his podcast, and I talked with him for about an hour and a half, maybe about an hour and 45 minutes. And he mysteriously, I don't know, the discussion disappeared. I don't know why. Now, I want to say it didn't.
Wait a minute. I gotta stop you there, Sam. Are you saying you did a follow-up discussion with Dr. Ron on his podcast for a couple hours, and it vanished? The recording vanished into a black hole?
It did. And I wasn't recording on my end. He was, he has a PhD, I believe, in communications or something like that. He's a computer guy. Now, I'm not saying, people make mistakes. I get that. And so I'm not going to say here that it went good for me, although I feel like it did. I was disappointed that it disappeared.
I suspect it went very good for you.
I was a little underwhelmed, but that's okay. That's okay. But maybe, if anyone wants to come up, and my critics love to tell me that they don't like hearing me talk, and that's fine. Come up so people don't have to listen to me.
Well, how did Dr. Ron Garrett's arguments in your recorded discussion, that unfortunately we'll never have the opportunity to see, how did his arguments differ, or how were they the same as those presented in the formal debate?
Well, we didn't really engage with a whole lot of what we talked about in the formal debate, which was disappointing. I was hoping that we would be able to engage with my opening argument. I think that it's a good argument. I pressed him in the Q&A about whatever it is within his metaphysic that would dictate anything that's possible or impossible. And he wasn't able to answer. I thought we were going to engage with that, and we didn't. But yeah, he told me that he's an atheist and that I ought to convince him that there is no God. And when I asked him, what rationale, what line of reasoning does he use to support that belief of the world? And he said, there's no evidence. I pressed him a little bit on that, and he wasn't able to defend the claim that there's no evidence, and it didn't get any better from there. So we're going to have another conversation, I hope. He wants to, so I'll give him that. He wants to have another conversation. I don't know, maybe I got to figure out a way to record it on my end as well.
Well, what are your thoughts on this, Sam? One of these commenters, he's bringing the heat. His name's Stefan. He was a commenter in the on the upload that we did of the opening statement. And he says this, and so let's have you refute it, okay?
Okay.
So he says, first, Sam put forth, it's so funny, like within minutes of this video posting last night, this guy just posts a novel. And that's what a lot of these keyboard ninjas will do, right? Because very few people have the time in their day to just go through every single point for 3 to 4 hours. I mean, there goes my day, right? Sorry, guys, no time to schedule events, no time to study, no time to catch up on emails, because I got to spend my day with these comment warriors who are so lazy they can't even get a handle pick. And then
they'll just delete their whole comment thread when they get refuted. They'll just delete their original comment, and everything disappears. And you're like, well, sure glad I spent 5.5 days on that one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Endless comment wars. So he says, first, Sam put forward a pile of nonsense. There's his assertion, right? Trying to defend the position that evolution could not result in a brain that can tell the truth from the false. We just have to ask one simple question. Which type of brain would serve its carrier best in survival and reproduction? Let's stop there so we go one point at a time. So he says, yeah. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah. So Patricia Churchland is a PhD atheist philosopher. That's partly her argument. And Alvin Plantinga, he's the one who's really made this argument very popular and defended it very well. And he's another PhD philosopher. And I think C.S. Lewis has made this similar argument, although he's not articulated this argument the way that Plantinga has. So to say that it's just a pile of trash, I mean, okay, sure. If that's what you say, then it should be really easy for you to come up and actually engage with it. And so, the argument's going to go on. I've already unpacked it, so I'm going to need to know how. Well, first of all, if their position is that the brain is just the mind is an emergent property of a brain, and the brain is just chemicals that are acting in accordance to the laws of nature, I'm not sure where you get the free will to rationalize and think things through anyway, right? I mean, you have to have the ability to choose otherwise, and that's not possible on some mechanistic view where everything is acting in accordance to laws that are apparently obligatory, laws that they can't justify, but I'll give them those laws for the sake of the argument.
Well, that's the thing. It's easy to make these kinds of assertions and hand wave away our points in comments. That's what it takes to be a comment warrior. His next point here, Sam, is this: one that does not show the carrier an accurate picture of the environment, or one that does show the carrier an accurate picture of the environment. But before you respond, he ends it with this. He doesn't really engage it in any real depth. He says the answer will be self-evident that the brain showing the carrier an accurate picture of the environment will be advantageous over the one that doesn't. And none of Sam alleged examples, I'm just reading it word for word, can contradict that. What are your thoughts, brother? Did he refute you?
Yeah, I mean, that would just beg the question. So let's back up a little bit. So the argument here is about the probability of it producing reliable results. So what do we mean by that? If my name is Nephi Smith and I live in Utah, what are the odds that I'm Mormon? They're probably pretty high, right? But what if my name is, Alhamid Muhammad and I live in Utah? The odds of me being a Mormon might be a little bit lower, okay? So if there are these evolutionary processes that create neurological structures, remember, when he talks about truth or a thought or any predication or whatever it might be, all he really means is a neurological structure. He doesn't believe that the mind is something independent from the brain, something that was created in the image and the likeness of God for a plan and a purpose to receive revelation. And part of that revelation would be the revelation of the external world on Christianity. On those terms, the probability of my brain comporting with reality and having access to truth would be really high. I can't be wrong about things, of course. But if you believe that your mind is just an emergent property of a brain, and that brain, what you mean by the mind is structures in the brain that were selected for beliefs that comport with survivability, not with truth, well, then we've lowered the probability of it producing true results. And so if he understood the argument, pointing to environments and talking about true states of affairs or untrue states of affairs, it just begs the question. So that's all that is. I mean, look, there's reasons, Donnie, why these people don't want to come up and engage with the argument.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I mean, I'm nice. You come up and we'll talk about it. I can even do it in a way where I'm not pressing you really hard, but I'll be happy to engage with your objections. And but yeah, you got to accurately represent the argument, though. That's something you're going to have to do. So,
well, they need to show or demonstrate that they understand the arguments that we're making. They understand the young Earth separate ancestry model, show that they can steel man what we're saying, so we're not engaging a straw man for an hour. And we can set aside the hardball apologetics, of course, if somebody wants to join, and we can adopt softball apologetics potentially, Sam. I don't know how good we are at doing that.
We can start that way, and we'll see what happens.
I do like to say, if you can't handle the heat, stay out of the kitchen, right?
Well, I mean, look, they're pretty confident for people that don't want to actually talk. But
well, I see a few arguments here, so why don't we?
Okay.
Well, firstly, you got some fans, Sam. I told you, the award-winning co-host, pretty soon the award-winning debater. Black Hat says, Sam, I would love to talk to you anytime, my friend. I need to sleep since he lives in Europe. Well, like you said, you do this frequently over on TikTok, don't you?
Yeah. So if you go to TikTok, that's going to be my profile there, and my handle is Redefine Living. And so, yeah, just send me a message, and if you send me a mature message, then I'll be happy to respond, and here we can talk about it. Or maybe you have a YouTube channel yourself and you want to have me on, and that would also be for those who disagree with me. That's fine.
Well, let's say this. We have currently an outstanding debate challenge. We have another one coming up July 23rd on the Raging Tomato. Pump for that. We're also finalizing the details on another one in August on modern day debate. And so I'm going to put the challenge out there right now. Any evolutionist, if you believe that you're related to grass and you assert that biblical creation is false, whatever, on the origins debate, we're happy to debate you. Reach out to James Coons, Modern Day Debate. We're looking for as many interlocutors as possible for these ongoing 2 versus 2 debates. So we're just looking for some brave evolutionists like Placid Light. He says, one compelling argument, okay? I'm excited to see what this argument is for humans being related to apes, so humans being related to chimps, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, is we both have the gene mutation removing our ability to synthesize vitamin C. So very familiar with that. I've debated that extensively over the years. That's the gulo pseudogene. Firstly, in general, the argument from pseudogenes, the assertion, Sam, is that, well, we share genetic mistakes, right, with chimpanzees in the biological world. So we must have inherited those genetic mistakes or mutations from a common ancestor. They argue that humans and chimps, so we as humans and chimps go back to a common ancestor roughly 6 to 9 million years ago. We've presented overwhelming evidence that contradicts that idea, which I'd love to see some evolutionists come in and engage. Y chromosome dissimilarity, massive discontinuities that we can get into. Okay. But we've actually discovered, and in my opening statement, or perhaps it was in my rebuttal, I showed at least 5 or 6 papers documenting known functional roles for so-called pseudogenes. Pseudogenes are known to regulate their protein coding counterparts. They can act as a decoy, and they will experience the degradation rather than the protein coding counterpart, which in many ways are essential. So we've discovered that pseudogenes are necessary to sustain healthy life processes in the cell. And so rather than being genetic mistakes, they're created units of DNA function. Therefore, not a surprise that we share them with the biological world. But of course, we've been experiencing 6,000 years roughly, as you know, Sam, of deleterious mutation accumulation. We live in a fallen world. You want to go back to the flood bottleneck? Yes. All life have been accumulating deleterious mutations. The majority of mutations are harmful, disease causing, slightly nearly neutral. Selection can't see them. So yes, we would also expect, especially in light of the fact that we have mutational hotspots, okay, we would expect some mutations occurring independently. And when it comes to the vitamin C pseudogene, the gulo pseudogene, this might indeed be a true genetic mistake. But here's the thing. You'd expect relaxed selection since we as humans, we get a lot of vitamin C from our diet. We don't necessarily require, it's not essential for life that we have a gene that can produce its own vitamin C. And the same thing goes for chimpanzees and the great apes and other kinds of life that have a diet heavy or saturated in vitamin C. And so for that reason, there could be a hot spot there. And so just because we have the same mistake as another creature like a chimpanzee does not mean, okay, there's a built-in presupposition there. That does not mean that we inherited that genetic mistake. Just like if I go to a car lot, oh, but cars don't reproduce. Yeah, you know what? Adding reproduction, Sam, adds more complexity and more problems for the science-denying evolutionists. If I go to a car lot that has 300 to 400 cars, I can go around inspecting all these cars, especially if it's a used car lot, and I'm going to find a lot of similar rust spots and a lot of similar points of damage on a variety of cars. It doesn't mean that all these vehicles inherited these damaged aspects from a common sedan ancestor in the Arctic. Okay, we live in the same environments, therefore we'd expect to experience a lot of the same negative effects. Okay, there's a lot there, but Placid Light, that's the quick response. If you'd like, I'll post the link again. Gulo pseudogene. If that's compelling to you, click the link and I can show you some papers. I've got one specific paper that talks about how across the biological world, there's the independent acquisition of this genetic mistake between organisms that evolutionists wouldn't even say are closely related. And so there's a lot there. We can go down deep, stay down long, come up dry if you'd like to, but that's why the link's there. Sam, because you got your hat backwards now, I know you mean business. So what's going on, brother? Are you hoping some evolutionists join or what?
I am hoping, yeah. I need to lower this light that I've got in front of my face. It's just casting the shadow. But yeah, I mean, that was the plan. The plan was that, you know, it's easy to say stuff in an echo chamber, right? And so, you know, we don't want to be accused of that. So I guess here we are. Is there nobody in the request box?
Nobody yet, but lots of comments.
You know, I find that hard to believe. So you've got about what, 130,000 followers now on Facebook.
We just hit 133,000 followers on Facebook.
And congratulations. That's a big number. And I know that you've got some critics over there. So did you air this over there? Did you let them know? Did you let them know we're doing this tonight?
And the comments are accumulating as well. Like, for example, this guy, Billy Wells. Okay, Billy says this, Sam. How do you address it? He says, debate ? So in his mind, he's thinking there's no debate, okay? It's a scientific fact that I'm related to grass and ladybugs. That's what he's telling himself. Whatever helps him sleep at night, right, Sam? So he says, if I was that sure, I'd write a paper and submit it. He says, real scientists write papers and discuss it in the journals. Amateurs debate on social media. Oh, we might as well shut down this new series, Sam. What are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, so I mean, I was just made aware of a new publication in the secular journals by Mark Armitage. And so that's going to be the dinosaur soft tissue argument. They're finding all kinds of stuff within these dinosaur bones that are said to be, 45 million years old or something like that. It's hard to keep track. They change it all the time. The problem here, though, is that you know, the decay rates of soft tissues are something that have been well established. So those are going to be established by a higher quality science, which was just a side note. When we had that debate with Ron, he said that there's no such thing as a distinction between high quality and high confidence science and low confidence science. But I wonder if he would take a medicine that I made in my garage without testing it first. But anyway, the decay rates of these soft tissues are something that's well established and published in secular journals. So the argument here, though, would be that because we find soft tissues in the dinosaur bones that are found within some of the lowest layer of the geological column, that therefore they're young. So that's an argument right out of your peer review. Another argument that I like, unless you wanted to say something about that. Donnie?
No, well, I mean, there's a lot we could say because that was a primary talking point in our formal debate. If you remember, there was one specific section. As a matter of fact, we have our brother Jeremy here. Jeremy from Team SFT. It's a privilege to have you. How you doing? Now, Jeremy, don't tell us that you've been so convinced by the evidence so far that you've now converted to evolutionism and you believe you're related to banana plants. Jeremy, can you hear us?
Wait.
Oh, there you go.
I'm in the restaurant right now.
So
a little noisy. I'll try to transfer to a more quiet place here.
Where you take your time. As you're doing that, I'll address.
All right.
Well, I think there's a bit of a lag now, Jeremy. Oh, Jeremy, maybe give us a sound check quickly. Okay, let's give Jeremy the opportunity there. He's lagging a little bit. Jeremy, I'll put you backstage so you get yourself situated. So with the papers, we quoted and cited in our opening statement of our last formal debate against Dr. Ron and First Amender, we went through plenty of papers, and the majority of them, if not all of them, were directly from the conventional literature. One of the papers that I cited and brought up in the discussion as well that they completely dodged was a paper written by Dr. Rob Carter, PhD marine biologist. He's a young earth creationist. What the evolutionists don't understand and what they lack, Sam, is critical thinking skills. They don't know how to read between the lines. And so, for example, regardless of the topic that we debate, whether it's pseudogenes, endogenous retroviruses, mutation rates, we can refute that argument directly from the conventional literature from these journals, okay? Many young earth creationists have also published even in the conventional literature. Why we can do that is because in these papers, you got the data. But what you don't want to do is blindly believe the inferences, interpretations, or ultimate conclusions from the data. For example, endogenous retroviruses. Oh, shared endogenous retroviral-like sequences demonstrate common descent, the reality of common descent. Oh, really? Here's at least a dozen papers showing essential functional roles for ERVs. And then they'll say, oh, yeah, but don't you know those are co-opted? Those functions evolved or were co-opted over time. So what they're doing, rather than critically thinking and reading between the lines, they're just blindly assuming that the stories that the evolutionary authors provide them are true. No, those stories, those inferences, those interpretations, that's what's debatable. The data is real, okay? And that's what these evolutionists don't understand, is that those papers from the conventional literature, including on dinosaur soft tissue, Sam, you mentioned Mark Armitage. We've got Dr. Brian Thomas, who last year published on dinosaur soft tissue in the conventional literature. There's no known mechanism that can preserve that kind of biomaterial, organic biomaterial, for millions of years. At max, we did a program. You can speak to this, Sam, with Dr. Joel Brown. Correct me if I'm wrong. Their experiments that they did at the Creation Research Society, real-time experiments, demonstrated that collagen, even in your best case scenarios for the evolutionists, can only last 500,000 years. Oh, well, that's a lot longer than the 6,000 year time frame. You're not getting it, science denying evolutionists. You need that collagen to be preserved for 65 million years. 500,000 isn't even close. And that's a best case scenario.
Yeah, that's a maximum.
The maximum.
Yeah, I mean, they've got some problems there. And so he it's funny you brought him up. I mean, he works in a laboratory where they're actually doing the science, trying to find some way to preserve these soft tissues, and they don't have anything. So, I mean, you can hope and have faith that one day they'll find a solution. But as it stands right now, they don't have science. You know, there's no argument from science that they're going to be able to use to suggest that that's not the case. And then, yeah, of course, I mean, like the last question was an example, I think, of genetic decay, which is something that's been established in the secular journals Same with mutation rates, the difference between, something that we were pressing First Amender on the debate, pressed him really hard. I pressed him a little bit. He literally crashed out and wouldn't let us ask him the distinction between a phylogenetic and pedigree mutation rate. So that's another argument from the journals, one that you've been pushing forever. Y chromosome, mitochondrial similarity.
Well, that's the problem. I'll say this because what you said is so important. That's the problem in real-time debate now. This has occurred several times, almost every formal debate we've done. I mean, Planet Peterson, he's been forced into early retirement. He'll never debate us again. We actually challenged him, Planet Peterson, to be one of the debate partners in that last debate we did. And he said he wants nothing to do with it because he got so decimated last year in the 2 versus 2 with Matt and myself. And he had a PhD on his side, PhD Tony. They both fumbled so hard. He had to call a friend. He had to phone a friend who wants to be a millionaire style in the middle of the cross exam, because these guys are not up to date on the best evidence for biblical creation and the most powerful evidence against their own position, the science fiction religion of evolutionism. And so that's the problem when they just get these, 4 or 5 paragraphs from ChatGPT or whatever in the middle. How do we refute this? I'm in the middle of a debate and they're bringing up mutation rates, and then ChatGPT spits them out like a story long response. And then you can see First Amender, he's got some kind of scripted and he's reading it. And then you ask a simple question. Are you referring to the observed pedigree rate or the phylogenetic rate? And he completely crashed out. But if he knew the answer to that, if he would have said, well, this is the observed rate, this is pedigree, he wouldn't have crashed out. If he knew the answer, if he knew the topic, then he would have answered your question, Sam. And then we would have said, okay, because he knew, no, this is the phylogenetic rate. So he was not answering our question without invoking evolutionary assumptions.
Yeah, he could have answered the question and just go on to say that he disagrees with it, which of course he disagrees with it, right? But that's why to say that we haven't made an argument when you don't actually understand the argument that's been made after it's been reiterated numerous times. I mean, I don't know. Was it just gaslighting at that point? I don't know what was happening. Maybe the hard alcohol was kicking in, I think.
I love at the end of that clip, that reel, so many good moments there. You're like, that's atheism in a nutshell, folks. Boom, mic drop.
it is though. I mean,
it's an embarrassment. I mean, if I were watching that and I was on the fence or agnostic on the topic of origins, I would not be convinced that I'm related to a banana plant. This is what we get consistently from these kinds of debates. And these are the most militant evolutionists that we're debating. That's why oftentimes when we do these formal debates versus some of the informal discussions that we'll have here with maybe more level-headed evolutionists, these are the most militant evolutionists out there. PhD Tony, Flying Spaghetti Auditor, Planet Peterson, First Amender. I mean, these are militant evolutionists, and their feet are being held to the fire. They know they don't have an answer. I want to address this real quick before I forget. KC Application says, not sure if Donnie or Sam will see this. I'm saving questions because in light of the time we started as well, I think our next open mic challenge, we'll just do it a little bit earlier. But so we're going to address comments too. Our arguments and lines of evidence from the live chat. He's talking about 40 known cases of human babies apparently growing tails. And this is known as an atavism. It supports evolution. Well, for my study on that and the pictures that I've seen, those aren't actual tails like we see in tailed animals. Okay. They're rare congenital soft tissue appendages. So these are defects, and they typically, if not always, lack tail vertebra. And so calling it an atavism assumes the evolutionary interpretation. So I wouldn't say a birth abnormality is evidence that we came from pre-human-like ancestors with tails. So if you want to present more on that, Casey, feel free to join and do so. But from what I've seen, we're not looking at true tails like we see in tailed animals. Anything you want to add there, Sam?
Yeah, I think 2 things. So I think first, we've done an unimaginable amount of experiments on all kinds of organisms. So fruit flies, for example, I believe there's a paper out there that states that they've done all the mutations within the fruit flies. Now, I don't know how true that is or how they would know that, but it's
They've done
out
a
there.
lot.
Maybe it's an article. It might not be a paper. So, but you could definitely look into that. And they can do some weird stuff. They can make eyeballs pop out all over the place, or extra set of wings and all kinds of things that would ultimately, result in its demise if it was out in the wild. But the point is, they've never been able to do anything that has created any type of anything truly novel or get it to evolve in an evolutionary sense. So yeah, you can get it to change. You can make it do weird stuff. And I mean, this is the case with everything that we've experimented on. And so I believe it's called, so back to this particular argument here, I believe it's called Dollo's law. And I believe it's according to Dollo's law, it states that if there's some significant evolutionary change, when something is lost, that is, it's no longer useful, and it's something that's complex that's lost, such as a tail, that it wouldn't be regained. And so I would think that would just violate one of their own evolutionary laws. And I believe it's called Dollo's law as well. So yeah, weird stuff happens. I think it's kind of cool.
Right. It is kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but certainly not evidence for common descent. I mean, again,
Right.
we live in a fallen world. As you put it, they've messed around with these fruit flies. I think it's the Hawks genes, where you get some of their body parts showing up in random places. I mean, this is not true evolution. This is just what happens, unfortunately, in a fallen world where there's genetic defects, birth anomalies. And so if these are true tales, then I would like to see it.
Yeah, there was a man. I wish maybe if somebody, I mean, where's Doki? I don't see Doki, but I need help. So I was looking through your past Kent Hovind debates, and I was looking for a debate that he had with a gentleman that had 2 PhDs, and he earned them in Linsky's lab. He actually worked in Linsky's lab.
Dr. Jay Bundy.
Is that who that was?
Yes, that was funny. That was Kent's 300th
right.
debate, if I remember correctly. So we made an event out of it.
So, Donnie, you've got to re-premiere that debate. In that debate, he literally conceded that the way that we are defining, they're making the distinction between speciation and evolution, there is no evidence of any kind of Darwinistic evolution taking place in that laboratory. 2 PhDs earned in that laboratory.
One of the most honest evolutionists out there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that was a good debate. The guy was really cool. And so, but yeah, I mean, if there was ever an experiment where something would have been shown, it seems like it should be that one. But we've done, bloodworms, the fruit flies, of course. They've done fleas. What else have they done? They've done all kinds of they've done all kinds of stuff. And yeast, they've done yeast, and they could never find any evolutionary type of change. So I don't know. I think it's I would be very underwhelmed if I was an evolutionist.
Well, and think about it. Firstly, CJB, thank you. Yeah, Pocket Lockers is channel. So bacteria, thousands and thousands of generations observed in the lab with bacteria, Lenski's E. coli, even with some true adaptive episodes, all we ever get is more bacteria. And in many cases, we're seeing reductive evolution where these bacterial species are throwing out pre-existing genes in order to survive or experience short-term adaptation, but overall they're shrinking in functional genome size. There's nothing really that we're observing that could be considered or extrapolated to forward evolution. The evolution story. So my point is, you go back billions of years ago to this world where all you have are just single-celled like organisms, bacteria type organisms. Today we got whales, we got insects, we've got humans, chimpanzees, banana plants. Take a whale, for example. So billions of years ago, you got bacteria, you got single-celled like ancestors. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, but do they have the information for hearts and brains and lungs and a circulatory system and all of these complex features? No. So over time, these would all have to come about through their claim mechanisms: gene flow, mutation, selection, epigenetics. genetic drift. So where is all this information? Where is all this these massive increases in phenotypic complexity, large scale changes? Where are these coming about? Because as you've pointed out in the lab with fruit flies and bacteria, it's a very simple argument, but it's appealing because all we ever get is more bacteria, oftentimes more degenerated bacteria, mutant fruit flies, but we're supposed to believe that fruit flies, bacteria, and whales are related through common ancestry. Is that science, Sam?
It's not science. And I think that's a huge problem that's not brought up enough. I mean, you're going to have to say that, something had to evolve. Many things had to evolve on their paradigm over and over and over again independently, because you got to keep pushing all of these, this simple life that came out of their primordial pond, whatever it was. And then, we see with the Cambrian explosion, that's another good argument. These critters are complex. They've got legs, they've got eyes, the very complex eyes, and they're going to have internal organs inside there. And so, what is this magical thing that contained all of this information, and where did that information come from? And by the way, if you're a critic and you want to talk about that information, don't waste your time with us here. There's a $10 million prize waiting for you at the Royal Society. For anyone who wants to posture and say, well, we got it all figured out, we know the way that it goes, Perry Marshall, through the Royal Society of London, he put $10 million on the table. Anyone can go there and provide that naturalistic mechanism and go get that 10 million. Dr. James Tour, he doubled down. He says, well, yeah, if you show me an amino acid form in a prebiotic state, there's another 10 million, that's $20 million sitting on the table for anyone who wants to figure that out. And yeah, I know they're going to say, well, this isn't abiogenesis. We don't want to talk about that because it's an embarrassment. But then that just means that you don't have a complete worldview. Right. That's weird. But yeah, I mean, it is part of your paradigm. You have to have something crawl out of the pond or out from under the rock or whatever it is. Whatever you can imagine, you just go ahead and imagine it, and it's going to have to be something really complicated, really complex. So what would it be?
Well, remember what that means is, because yes, they don't like to deal with abiogenesis, because whatever theory or hypothesis of abiogenesis that they throw at us, RNA world, metabolism first, amyloid hypothesis, within their own conventional literature, there are those who prefer each model that refute each other. And so each model within the world of abiogenesis is being attacked militantly because none of them are true. None of them work. They all have massive problems. And that's because the best explanation is actually what we put forth, the design diversity model, that yes, chemical evolution, abiogenesis is false. It's imaginary. The original created kinds, the original life forms were simply front-loaded with design diversity, the ability to adapt. That's why, and we point out in these debates, like the last one, you'll remember this section, Sam, with the mutually interdependent systems. There's many we could point to. One simple one, which I love, is the DNA and DNA repair enzymes. The fact that we can accumulate in a single cell. Think about it. In a single cell in a single day, and we got 65 trillion cells, we can experience up to 1 million DNA lesions. That's billions and billions of mistakes. Okay. But thank God we have these incredibly designed DNA repair enzymes. They go in and fix a lot of these. Some still get passed on. That's genetic entropy, but a lot of them are fixed. Okay. So what came first, the DNA or the DNA repair enzymes? Because the evolutionist has a problem. If they say DNA, well, you need DNA repair enzymes to fix these DNA breaks, or organisms are going to go extinct. If you see the DNA repair enzymes, well, the information for the DNA repair enzymes are encoded in the DNA. Point is, you need them both at the start working together, just like the Bible says God created, and it was very good. So in our debate, we pressed Dr. Ron and First Amender on this. First Amender, many times during the debate, he just leaned back and confidently said, well, the answer is we don't know. And then they just called it God of the Gap. So I want to ask you that, Sam. How do you like to respond when we put forth these pieces of evidence, these hard lines of scientific evidence that literally work to preclude common descent and naturalistic origins? and they just admit they don't know, but maybe in the future we'll know. This is just God of the gaps. It doesn't mean there's a designer. It doesn't mean that the Bible's true. How do you like to respond to that, Sam?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. Well, first, I'll just point out the double standard. I mean, if we were to concede that something like that, just sit back and relax and say, "Well, I don't know." I mean, they would rip us to shreds over that, But they have no problem doing it, which is fine. I don't claim to know all of these things, but regarding the gaps argument, so within the Christian worldview, we're starting with the knowledge that God is who He is, and that God exists, and all things that exist because of God. Like the Bible says, God upholds all things by the power of His word. So that's not a gaps argument. We're saying, so for example, you just had a debate between plate tectonics and hydroplate, PhD evolutionist, and I pressed him on this. Well, I want you to justify the laws of physics that he says. First, I told him you shouldn't. Don't talk about that with me. He wanted to anyway, but he couldn't. So they can't justify the laws of physics. So why am I saying all of that? We're saying that science is possible because of God. Intelligibility is possible because of God. The world is rationally understood because of God. That's not a gaps argument. But what is a gaps argument is when you sit back and say, well, I don't know, maybe one day, atheism will find a way. That's a gaps argument. That's a naturalism of the gaps argument. So we call that posturing. That's what that looks like. And projection. So the gaps argument is when you say, well, I don't know, but I'm going to fill in this thing in that gap of knowledge. And in their case, it would be naturalism. God exists whether I know things or I don't know things. He's not a placeholder, not a gaps argument.
What if an atheist says, well, this line of reasoning, Sam, that you take, including the transcendental argument, which you're so good at, that this is all circular. It assumes the Bible's true anyways to begin with, but the burden is for you to prove that's the case. How would you respond to that, Sam?
Yeah, so when we're talking about foundational things, things that are derivative, okay, things that are not foundational, avoiding circularity helps. But when we're talking about foundational things, there's going to be some types of circularity there. It's unavoidable. You can't you can't tell me that you have a rational mind without invoking a rational mind. The logicians discuss the laws of logic, and hopefully their discussions are logical. And so that's going to be foundational, and their circularity is going to be unavoidable. And so what we should be asking ourselves is if our circularity is virtuous or vicious. Is my circularity going to destroy intelligibility in science, or is it going to secure it? And can I give some sort of justification for that circularity? So again, back to that geologist. He says, well, the laws of physics have to be a certain way or else science isn't possible. I fully agree. But can you justify this universal claim that things are the way they are and that they are immutable and it's always been this way on an evolutionary timeline? It's a very similar argument that I made with Ron Garrett. Now, they're not able to justify that. But now, on the other hand,
Sam, take your time, brother. We got a couple people backstage, so I think we're going to have some fun. Take your time because I've been in the sun all day and drinking a lot of water. I'm going to use the restroom, come back fresh so we can engage in some debate. So
all right.
Keep saying what you're saying. Great stuff, brother.
Let's get ready. Yeah, but on the other hand, on the Christian worldview, where God, again, upholds all things by the power of His word, those laws of nature, when we discuss the ontology of them, we would say that they are concrete. They stand in a cause and effect relationship with the physical world. So Christianity provides that foundation for science. And if that's rejected, well, that's fine. But now you've got some answers, or some questions that need to be answered. And this is the problem that we're going to find all the way down, whether we're talking about science, whether we're talking about truth, or we're talking about logic, knowledge, ethics. Ethics is a very easy win for any believer. It's weird when atheists or unbelievers make arguments in the domain of ethics, saying God's a meanie or whatever. But even those things, in order for you to make an ethical argument, you're going to have to presuppose some sort of objective ethical foundation. And so I would just wonder what that would look like if it's not the biblical foundation. So, back to the God of the gaps argument, if it's the case that none of these things can be justified on any non-biblical worldview, well, then at least we can say that those non-biblical worldviews are false. That doesn't make the biblical worldview true. But what we can say is that foundationally, the circularity is no problem. But because the biblical worldview can satisfy all of these different preconditions, all of these different areas, then the biblical worldview is objectively true. And so there's a positive argument for God. Now I'm going to go a little bit further, and I'm going to say that because the biblical worldview describes the creation narrative, then I would say that the biblical depiction of the creation narrative on a biblical timeline, I would go further and I would say that that is objectively true as well. And so that would be a type of transcendental argument for both the truth of the Christian worldview and for the truth of the Christian paradigm. So yeah, I mean, I guess I can keep going on, Donnie, but when you get back, just come back in. So this argument is going to continue. The argument is going to go something like that: we know biblical creation is true because the biblical worldview is true, and therefore the naturalistic interpretation of the physical world is false. And so we want to make sure that like to make sure when I'm engaging with the critics that I'm making that distinction between the facts. The facts are the things that exist, that are extended in space. The facts of this object here, whether it be a rock on the road or an apple on the table, that would be a fact. But the interpretation of that fact, that's where we're going to disagree. And so the naturalists, they're going to have a naturalistic interpretation of that fact, naturalistic interpretation, for example, of the stratigraphic, the geological column, those layers, the stratigraphic layers there. So their interpretation of those layers, we're going to say, okay, fine, those layers exist. That is a fact that there are these layers. But they're going to say that their interpretation would be that these layers laid down over, eons of time through slow, gradual processes, which again presuppose the uniformity of nature, which presuppose the laws of physics, which they can't justify. But, moving past that, we're going to hold a different interpretation. We're going to say, well, no, we believe that the correct interpretation here would be that these layers were laid down hydrologically, and they are evidence of a global flood. And so we see here, when we've made a distinction between the fact of the geological column and the way that they are interpreted, so now we're having a battle over the different interpretations of that said fact. And so because the non-biblical worldview cannot justify the preconditions of science, the preconditions of intelligibility to interpret that fact, then those non-biblical worldviews are false, along with their interpretations of those facts. And so that's going to be a type of, so there's Howard is in your comment section. Maybe Howard would like to come up. Howard is the gentleman that I was talking to. Nice enough guy. He's the guy, the PhD, who was arguing over his naturalistic interpretation of the physical world. In the comment section there, I left a comment and he began to engage with me. But when I think when I made myself very clear and let him know that it's the Christian worldview alone that can satisfy the preconditions of science, he became very obtuse, right? Howard, let's be real. You did. And you didn't actually want to engage. It's all still there. Anybody can go and see. So Howard, along with the naturalist, not just Howard's, again, he's a nice enough guy.
Howard's coming at you.
I am. Again, the naturalist wants to say that these processes have been taking place over eons of time. But then he did contradict himself, because he says, well, no, what we mean by uniformity changed in the 60s. And as long as that anything is possible according to the laws of physics, then it's okay. But that would include accelerated nuclear decay rates and catastrophic processes. So even if we grant him the laws of physics, which he couldn't justify, he really undermined his whole position. But he couldn't justify the laws of physics that he's using to extrapolate these processes over a long period of time. Howard, you got to read up on this, bud, like even your atheist camp has pointed this out, your philosophers, when they try to argue against things like miracles, they can't defend their argument, just like you couldn't defend your argument against miracles in that comment section. You guys go check it out. I guess that's
Sam,
about it.
Excellent stuff. That was some great information. Reminder to the chat, the challenge is specifically evolution, biological evolution. Howard, good to see you. As tempting as it is to get into the flood and stratigraphy and geology, I think that's an open mic for another day. We want the best evidence and arguments for why apparently ladybugs, grass, whales, and pine trees are related through common ancestry. We are going to be having a good seminar, though, Howard, that I'm hoping you'll be there for in the live chat. I've been chatting with Mike Ord, and so we're going to have a live seminar where we are going to engage a lot of your arguments, Howard. So I do appreciate you bringing those forth and being up to date and giving us some fun, because I think he brought up one of those arguments, actually. Let me see here. Howard, he is mentioning, okay, stratigraphy, but I feel like there's another one that he made, river channels, maybe. I guess that was during the debate. Well, until I can find that, I got a few other arguments here that I see come in, but I see backstage, truth over tea. Can you please let me know what your position is in the private chat? Tell me a little bit about yourself. For anybody who joins these open mics, as we are going to be doing these frequently, Sam and myself, and trying to incorporate them at all different times of the day, just so we can get all the variety of evolutionists joining, leaving no excuse, right? Because some evolutionists might make the excuse, well, the reason why we didn't join to defend our religion is because it was too late. Well, don't worry. We'll do some earlier ones too. We're going to give you all the opportunity, including team dodgeball. And so truth over tea backstage. Please let me know what your position is. Are you an evolutionist, creationist? And then everybody who, because we do want to prioritize evolutionists for this one. So evolutionists, give us your best evidence for common descent. The link is pinned and we'd love to engage it. But we also want you to engage our challenges, like the Y chromosome challenge, for example. The Y chromosomes between humans and chimpanzees, when you consider overall architecture, size differences, and gene content, are less than 30% the same. Why the evolutionists in our last debate failed is because all they could do was assert mechanisms. First Amender, for example, he said, well, the lack of recombination in the Y chromosome means that the Y chromosome can change more quickly. They can accumulate a lot more mutations. Okay, you named your mechanism. Good for you. That's a nice assertion. And sure, the fact that Y chromosomes are non-recombining for the most part means that there might be some variation in terms of the changes that can accrue. But now it's the evolutionist's job to provide me a quantitative model. Show me which lineage lost what, which lineage gained what happened to the heterochromatin, how were the gene families either gained or lost. Naming a process is not the same as explaining a result. And so all we ever get in these debates are assertions and claims. So for those in the chat and also for future open mic programs, I want to see an actual model and an answer to our challenges. Y chromosome dissimilarity challenge. I want to see a demonstrated pathway, not just purported mechanisms. Secondly, mutation rates. Mutation rates in the mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome, they're fast. There's low diversity. For example, in the mitochondrial chromosome, there's low diversity, roughly on average between 20 and 30, between any two people on the planet separating from Eve, 20 to 30, max maybe 120 to 130. Trivial. So how long does it take to accumulate a few DNA differences in light of a fast mutation rate? Only a couple hundred generations. Where's the hundreds to thousands of mutations and thousands of generations in the mitochondrial chromosome? It doesn't exist. That's why mitochondrial Eve is in fact biblical Eve based on mutation rates, based on diversity levels. This is the data. So Y chromosome dissimilarity challenge, mutation rate challenge. Thirdly, DNA function. We have evidence for genome-wide functionality. ENCODE and subsequent projects have discovered that at least 80% of the genome has evidence for biochemical activity. The overturning of the junk DNA paradigm at the same time as the overturning of the best arguments for evolution, like endogenous retroviruses. The question with ERVs is, are these really the ancient vestiges of past viral infections, or are they mostly created units of DNA function? Well, they function in embryological development. They act in the immune system. They act to determine cell types. They can perform viral mimicry. The fact that they have known functional roles means that it shouldn't be a surprise that we share those DNA units with the biological world, including chimpanzees. Okay, so here's a few of the challenges that we want evolutionists to engage. And so, Sam, here's a couple points that came in that are not providing evidence. And so evolutionists, feel free to join as long as you're going to engage the topic. Gracious crybaby, good to have you. But unfortunately, you're about to be an evolutionist crybaby in light of how Sam and I dismantle your argument here. So he says, you accept that natural selection is not a creative process. It's not adding anything novel. It's not increasing phenotypic complexity. It's a fine-tuning mechanism that keeps the species as strong as it can be. And it's limited. The majority of mutations are nearly neutral. Sam and I could talk all day about the last program we did a few weeks ago with Paul Price, the simulations that Paul Price ran refuting Dr. Zach Hancock and Dan Stern-Cardinal's paper. Genetic entropy is stronger than ever. These mutations build up, unchecked, they degenerate, and species descend into genetic sickness. That's not forward evolution. Then he says mutations in sexual selection exist. Still not mechanisms that are going to take your fish to fisherman and bacteria-like organism to biologist. The majority of mutations are overwhelmingly deleterious, nearly neutral. Selection can't see them. Okay. And sexual selection. Sam, go ahead. So far, what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I mean, hyperspeciation, we don't take that to mean the same thing as somebody who believes in evolution does. So evolution, you're going to have to say that there's like an increase in information. You got to build up all of that neat stuff that we have. And so we're going to say that it's the hyperspeciation that's going to come with the fixation of certain locations and, and even a loss or a breaking of genetic information. So you can take an apex dog and you can lose its ability to have, long hair and end up with a short-haired creature that might do very well in the desert, but not so well in the cold climate. And then the same would be true as if you have a dog that, produces long hair. It's not going to survive in the desert. It's going to do a lot better in the Arctic. So it's a different type of process that we're invoking. So yeah, hyperspeciation, sure, but that's not what we mean by evolution.
Jeremy, let's give you a test, brother. I see you bouncing in and out backstage. Let's see if it's working. Jeremy, give us an audio check, brother.
Hello, you guys hear me?
Yes. I think we got you. Are you in a spot outside of the restaurant and all the noise?
Actually, I just came from the restaurant. I'm home right now.
Okay. Now, don't tell us that you now believe you're related to grass and strawberries in light of all the evidence presented here tonight there, Jeremy. Are you an evolutionist now, brother?
Well, I was before, but I don't find it compatible with real evidence these days. So I don't think I'm going back there.
Dr. Feldman, it's great to have you. But from my understanding, your specialty is not genetics and biology, which is kind of what we're focusing on here. So, I mean, you're free to join, of course, to engage, but the topic is, biological evolution. Is that what you're planning to come in and engage?
You're on mute, Dr. Feldman. We can't hear you. You might have to go. You might have to go in your StreamYard. So, like at the bottom of your page, the bottom of your screen, there should be a few little icons. One of them is going to be a little microphone image. You might have to select that.
It does say you're unmuted on my end, Dr. Feldman. So you might have to maybe leave studio and try and oh, are you coming in?
That should fix it.
There you go.
Yeah, sorry, I am sorry I missed the first hour. And I apologize for that, but
That's okay.
Fossil record. If that's not appropriate for this session, then I'll bow out.
Well, I'll say this: the fossil record. The fossil record. This is my argument, and Sam would concur, I'm sure. Fossils are fickle. They can tell you any story that they want you to. It's low confidence, low quality science. Why I like to focus on the genetic data, Dr. Feldman, is because it's the most direct way to answer the question of ancestry. Genes and traits, that's what's inherited sperm and egg. And our historical reconstructions based on the fossil record are only going to be as good as the empirical evidence allows it to be. And so it's my position that genetic evidence like deleterious mutation accumulation, that puts shelf lives on genomes. And so if species can't persist for millions of years into the future, then how could they have persisted for millions of years into the past? Fossils, wherever you look in the so-called geologic column going back 500 million years, that reflects extinct biology. Today, we know that mutations put shelf lives on biology. And so by definition, those fossils of those organisms in the past in the geologic column, they're attributed to those layers that are said to be millions of years old. But if those organisms in those layers can't be millions of years old based on deleterious mutation accumulation, then neither can the layers. So I would actually argue that the genetic data can also refute deep time, since biology in the past is found in those layers. Dr. Feldman, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I strongly disagree. First of all, I took a genetics course in university back in the 70s. So that's my limited knowledge of genetics. And it's just not my area of expertise. But I have studied paleontology. That's my primary PhD, and I've studied stratigraphy since then. So I would disagree strongly with that. I think the fossil record, supports a succession of different kinds of life that ultimately gets more and more similar to our life today. And that when you look at the details, the stories that I've heard from creationists about, animals running from the flood or lower, deeper, ecological zones closer to the water getting buried first and more terrestrial forms getting buried later. None of that fits. Of course, my big argument for deep time comes from all the river valleys that we see in between the marine layers and the soils associated with those river valleys. So I think that, kills any kind of a young Earth hypothesis. But I don't pretend to have any expertise to understand basically anything you just said. So if that's really what you want to talk about tonight, then I'll just bow out. And
I'd be happy to meet in the middle and discuss your argument from the fossil record of this succession from more simple organisms to life, to fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals. I'm okay to address the paleontological data. I've done a lot of study in hominin fossils, so I'm not sure how familiar you are.
That's not my thing, but
okay. I mean, it's still fossils, though.
Yeah, they are fossils. Yeah. So I guess
I want to ask you this, Dr. Feldman. How would you respond to this? Because let's say I were to challenge you with deleterious mutation accumulation. You said you're not an expert, so I'm not saying for us to get in a long discussion on that. But another one as well, the mutation rate data. If we have mutation rate data in, let's say, the mitochondrial DNA, low diversity, fast rates based on pedigree studies, you can look at Parsons, Howell, Helgeson. There's a number I could show you. And the rate is fast. They admit, I can pull up on my screen. They say if we just take the observed rate in mitochondrial DNA, the last ancestor, Eve, mitochondrial Eve, would have lived just 6,000 years ago. So if we take the empirical rate, the observed rate, trace it backwards, we get a mitochondrial Eve ancestor of 6,000. So my point is the empirical data is contradicting the deep time story where you're saying, well, all these other lines of evidence, which would say the earth is millions and billions of years old, or humans go back a couple 100,000 years old. So I'm not asking you to be an expert on the mutation rate data, but if that contradicts your other arguments from fossils, from geology, from stratigraphy, how do you balance those two things?
Well, yeah, I don't have the expertise to evaluate anything you just said. I never heard of any of those people. I'll put it this way. I've watched many episodes of your show where you do have geologists on and you do talk about geology. And I'd say based on the error rate that they have in their discussions, which is very high, I don't trust what creationists say about the evidence because I see fundamental mistakes made by all of them so often. And it just, it makes me cringe when I hear people saying things that I know for a fact are not true objectively. I'm not talking about worldview or interpretation.
Yeah, well, you are, though, because science deals with provisional claims. It doesn't deal with things that you're calling facts, right? Or truth.
Well, no, it doesn't.
Hold on. Those are not words that belong in a scientific vocabulary. And those are not words that can be justified outside of a biblical worldview.
Well, and I want to say this, and then Howard, I want to give you uninterrupted time to respond. But in light of what you said there, okay, how would this right here, just you got a PhD, which means you got good critical thinking skills, good observation skills. Just from this paper alone, Parsons was one of the one that I mentioned. And again, I understand you said this is not your expertise, so I'm not necessarily challenging you to refute it, but I'm just asking you to back up the claim that, well, what you see from Cratius is lies or misrepresentations. Okay, well, here from the Parsons paper, and I've got an important aspect of it highlighted, they say, thus I'm just wondering, how is this a lie? How is this a misrepresentation? They say, thus our observation of the substitution rate is roughly 20-fold higher than would be predicted from phylogenetic analyses. There's the phylogenetic versus pedigree rate. Phylogenetic analyses is where they basically look at differences between humans and chimpanzees, assume the split took place 6 to 9 million years ago, count up the differences, you get a slow rate, okay? But they say, using our empirical rate, so they're looking at the D loop, the control region in the mitochondrial chromosome, and the rate is fast, okay? It's about 1 out of every 30. And they say using that rate to calibrate the mitochondrial DNA molecular clock would result in an age of the mtDNA, most recent common ancestor, of only 6,500 years. So as a Cratius, we'd say, wow, this fits beautifully because according to the Bible, Eve does go back about 6,000 years. So my question is, and I'm not asking you to refute this or anything, but how would this be? We're just clearly looking at what it says. So how could we be lying if I use this? Or how is this a misrepresentation in any way, Howard?
Well, I can't evaluate that because I haven't read the other articles on the same topic that may have come to different conclusions and then trying to understand what they saw that these people didn't see. And so that's why I don't have the expertise to evaluate it. But, getting to your point that it's all interpretation, that's not true.
Well, did you just? So let me give you a specific. Dr. Howard, you just conceded that point with your last response. You just conceded that there can be conflicting interpretations of the data, and that was the argument that I made. The argument that I made when you were in the chat is that we have the facts of the physical objects there, be it the stratigraphic record or whatever it might be, and then there are different ways that the data is interpreted. And we can see conflicting interpretations of the data both within one particular field of study and without. So you actually just did concede my point.
Well, no, let me give you an example, if I can, a couple of examples without interruption. So one is when Dr. Warner was on your show, he drew an example of what a river channel would look like in cross section, and he said, well, we don't see these features, and he listed a whole bunch of places where we don't see these features. I don't know if you remember that, but that was about a 20-minute discussion on your show, maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago.
I think it was a clip from a longer seminar that we did.
Yeah, well, I watched the whole thing, but that was the one that got me. And yet those exact features, I mean, he described them beautifully of what a cross section of a river channel would look like. Now, it is an interpretation that it's a river channel, but what I'm saying is the exact feature that he described is present in every single outcrop he said it wasn't. And so that's objective. I mean, you can dispute whether they're river channels. I don't see how you could do that based on the sedimentology. But the very fact is he drew what it should look like and said they weren't there, and they are. And so there's a direct contradiction. Here's one more example. You had a guest on who claimed that all the sediments were soft when they were deposited. And yet we see river valleys where there are chunks of the rocks exposed in the valley walls that are preserved as conglomerates at the base of the valley. And you can match the lithology and show that that's where they come from. And so we know that in many cases, the river valleys, and these are river valleys that are embedded in rocks where you have marine rocks below, marine rocks above, and then you have the river valley in between. And so we know for a fact that the rocks were lithified before the valley was eroded, because we have chunks of those rocks in the valley fill. And so I'm not talking about interpretations. I'm talking about direct observations that contradict many of the things your guests have said.
Well,
but okay, Sam, you go ahead first.
Yeah, I was going to say the point here though is that observations that are therefore interpreted can be overturned based off of new information. So it could be that somebody has misunderstood a certain fact of the world. But again, when you use words like truth or false, I mean, that's just making an error. That was, Stephen Jay Gould came along and he pointed out, like, within your field that we see evidence of stasis. And so, you're trying to say that, well, no, the fossil record is indicative of slow, gradual change. He would disagree with you. And
I never said that.
He's not a creationist. And so then they had to fabricate some idea of punctuated equilibrium to show that, well, okay, the evolutionary changes happen fast. But that was a philosophical statement. That wasn't a scientific statement.
I never said slow, gradual change. That you're putting words in my mouth.
Well, you did. I'll back up and I will remind you. Yeah,
I said the evolution. I said the fossil record strongly supports evolution. I never said slow, gradual.
No, your interpretation of the fossil record, of course, supports evolution as you.
If I could, Howard, by evolution, you're talking the theory of common descent, that all life's related. Humans, chimps, plants all go back to a common ancestor. Well, if I can break that tree closest to home with humans and chimpanzees, I can show you strong discontinuities in the hominin fossil record where there's a lack of transition in key features like the hyoid bone, for example, which is the design of it that we have is necessary for sophisticated speech and language, which the hyoid in the Australopithecines that we find and also in the extant apes is built in a way that's not designed for the kind of speech that we have. And I could show you papers and I'll, for sake of time, I won't. But the point is that I could show you discontinuities and missing transitions as close to home. So if that cuts off humans and chimps being related, well, then you can go real deep down in the geologic column like you typically do and try and connect all life there. But if we've already shown you that humans and chimps can't be related through the genetic data and the fossil data, what does that mean about common descent and the interpretations you're making based on the river channels and the succession in the fossil record? How do you balance those things?
Well, just because you lack fossils of a certain transition doesn't mean that transition didn't happen. It just means we haven't yet found the fossils or they weren't preserved. Lack of evidence isn't evidence of lack. What's the phrase?
Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. But
Correct. Thank you.
That's just you're just invoking faith at this point, or
That's not faith. That's not faith, because there are so many good transitions that we do have.
No, you don't.
Not every fossil succession shows transition, and this is, we know a lot more.
Humans. Well, and you made an assertion, Howard, and I appreciate you engaging us. Lots of great transitions. Okay, let's take humans, because again, I like to stick as close to home as possible, because for me, we can argue all day. Are humans and strawberries related through common ancestry? But if I can show you that humans and chimps are not related through common ancestry, well, then that definitely means humans and strawberries aren't. And so if you want to stick with the fossil record, let's stay as close to home as possible. What are my
only discomfort for that is my lack of expertise on hominid fossils. I did take a course on hominid evolution in 1978 or something. And so I'm not up to date on it. This is my profession, and it's not hominid fossils, but I'll give you an example where we do have great transitions. And that's the appearance of mammals. That's probably the best example that I know of. And, when you look at the succession of fossils, the appearance of mammal traits is very gradual. Mammals don't just appear out of nowhere. You've got fur that comes, then you've got differentiated teeth, and then, there's a whole succession of traits that appear gradually. And, we don't have the transition between every single pair of fossils, but we have a lot of them. And so there's an excellent example that doesn't really fit any other model that I know of.
Are you referring to the mammal-like reptiles?
Yeah, the therapsid system.
Therapsids.
Yeah.
So my question would be, and I'd be happy to engage the therapsids, but just to push on this point, and again, I understand you said you don't have the expertise in hominins, so you want to focus on the evolution of reptiles to mammals, and that's okay. We can engage that. But my point would be, if I can show you with the genetic data, the mutation rate data, DNA function, Y chromosome dissimilarity, just to name a few, that humans and chimps aren't related, and genetics are the direct way to answer this question of ancestry, then these historical reconstructions that you make of reptiles to mammals to eventually man, it's contradicted by the empirical evidence. If you want to focus on the fossils, this is what I was saying. And for the audience sake, I want them to understand why this is an important point, because I understand what you're saying, Dr. Feldman, about certain traits. Okay. Yep. Maybe we lack transitions in certain morphological features or traits, but when it comes to major transitions, like the evolution of our ability to talk and speak the way we do, well, here on the screen, we've got the hyoid bone is the anchor for human speech, and the fossil record gives us only two designs, ape-like and human-like. And I got a whole presentation on this, but I'll just say the point is, the only known hyoid bone that we find is designed and shaped with the Australopithecines in the same way that extant apes are. And humans, ours is designed and built in a way that allows for what we're doing, sophisticated speech. So the question of the evolutionists would then be, what's the evidence from a proto-hyoid bone, or what we see in the Australopithecines, primitive as you may call it, to the type of hyoid that we have today in humans? I mean, that's a major transition, because we're talking about sophisticated language and speech. So it's not something minor. It's the kind of transition that now I feel like you're just invoking faith. So the point is, now the mammal-like reptiles, okay, but we just showed you that humans and chimps aren't related. We lack these major transitions. Mammal-like reptiles, well, now maybe the Cretaceous interpretation of the mammal-like reptiles are better.
Well, I don't know what the creationist interpretation of the mammal-like reptiles is.
Okay.
They're certainly not reptiles. Mammal-like reptiles is a terrible, terrible term, because we just lack a term for them, because they're not reptiles and they're not mammals, and we just don't have a word for that group of animals. So they don't.
Maybe for the audience sake, can you explain? So therapsids is the technical term. Mammal-like reptiles is that's kind of the famous way of calling them. Well, what makes them transition? I understand they got a blend of features of reptile and mammal traits, but which specifically, Howard?
So it's the skull. So
Okay.
and I'm trying to bring up. I have a diagram that has all this in it in Adobe Illustrator, and I'm trying to remember where I put that bloody file because I obviously don't have it handy. So it's the so if there's anapsid skulls, synapsid skulls, and diapsid skulls, and I think it's gosh darn, I'm really mad at myself for not getting this diagram ready, and maybe it's in my evolution folder. So anyways, there's the fundamental architecture of the skull that differentiates reptiles, which are diapsids, from the synapsids, which are the amphibians, and there's a group that are in between amphibians and reptiles that are synapsids, and then there's a few like turtles are also synapsids, but most of the reptiles are diapsids, which means they have a specific number of openings in their skulls for attachment of muscles in the eyes. And then it's a completely different skull for the therapsids. And the therapsids have this different skull, which I can't remember the name of right now. And they also begin to have differentiated teeth. And then as you follow the therapsids through the succession of faunas of different ages, you see the appearance of mammal characteristics gradually to the point where, even the experts have a tough time deciding where that dividing line is, where you put the mammal it's not really a mammal reptile boundary, it's a mammal non-mammal boundary, because the therapsids aren't reptiles, even though they're called mammal-like reptiles. That's a terrible name.
Okay.
So that answer your question, or am I evading?
No, I think that's an appropriate answer. I think it's helpful. Are you familiar with some of the work being done by statistical baraminologists like Dr. Matthew McLean, Dr. Todd Wood? Dr. Matt McLean, for example, gave a presentation here specifically on the mammal-like reptiles roughly 4 to 5 years ago. And he went into some of his work where he looks for discontinuities in some of these fossil groups, making predictions that, okay, if separate ancestry is true, well, then we would expect to find discontinuities in hominins, in the therapsids, in dinosauria, all these different groups. And he's published material and he's given talks where he's found enough discontinuities and morphological features in your therapsids to show separate ancestry. And so, yeah, these are interesting mosaics. They have an interesting combination or suite of traits, but there's enough discontinuity there to separate them off. And I'm just giving you the layperson explanation. I mean, you could look into.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't see that presentation, so I really can't comment on it. But like I said, every time I've seen a presentation on your show in an area where I know well, which is a lot, there have been deep flaws to the point where it completely destroys their argument. And I've seen this over and over again. So it's hard for me to have trust in what you're saying.
Well, I can tell you my specialty is genetics and biology. And I cite a variety of papers. I do what I did earlier, and I show exactly what they're saying. I give excerpts. But oftentimes evolutionists might say, well, you're misrepresenting it because the authors are not young Earth creationists. Well, of course, like with these mutation rate papers, they admit the 6,500 year date is clearly incompatible with what we know about human evolution and the origin of humans in Africa. And so, and then they give a variety of reasons, right? But the point is, what's debatable is not necessarily the data, but the interpretations or inferences. So as a creationist, I would not be misrepresenting the paper if I say, here's the data. Fast observed mutation rates take us back 6,500 years. How do the authors explain that contradiction? Well, they might invoke selection or somatic cell mutations or heteroplasmy, all these technical terms. And then we can debate that. So I'm not sure if that's the same thing that we see in these geology papers. We'd have to look at those, Dr. Feldman.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking away because I'm looking for that bloody file of mine and I just can't find it. But, when I say I see problems, these aren't just worldview or interpretation problems. They're direct evidence that contradicts what they're saying. I'll give you another
Yeah,
example.
well, so let me actually say something. I haven't said something in a minute here. So Dr. Feldman, I realize that you say that quite a bit, and you're very, I think that you're a little bit loose with your language. And the reason why I say that is because numerous times I've heard you make the argument that, well, it's evolutionary or deep time assumptions that help us find oil, right? That's a talking point that you brought up in your debate numerous
Absolutely.
times. But we had David McQueen. He worked on oil rigs. He's a geologist, worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. He's very, very familiar with that process. And he pointed out numerous times on this channel that you could just identify the layer with a letter. The assumption of time applied to that layer has no relevance in discovering the oil. So they would drill down and they would find certain sedimentary fragments or fossils that are indicative of the layers that are encapsulating the oil. And then they would drill a little bit further and find the oil. And so when you talk about, honesty and dishonesty, and you throw these words out, I would say recklessly, we've rebutted these things and you've repeated them. What's your response to that? Suppose that we were to identify the layers with letters and not ages at all. Would they still be intelligible?
And Dr. Feldman, I want you to respond uninterrupted. I just wanted to show for your own homework or reading after, you can look at this article from New Creation, and they give a summary of his research, but you can dig deep on it, where they say in his research, Dr. McLean has also found that there are discontinuities separating most of the major therapsid groups from each other. He additionally has found evidence of discontinuity among cynodont groups, including among so-called primitive mammalian forms. In other words, there is no complete continuous change linking these, what would this be, like a precursor to therapsids on one end of the cynodonts to mammals on the other. And you can go through some of the work here. And that's some of the work that baraminologists are doing. And I think it's really good. And it's complementary to the genetics work that we're doing, Dr. Feldman.
So I'll respond to that and then to the oil stuff. So the pelycosaurs, those are the everybody knows what pelycosaur. Those are the big fin-back reptiles.
Right.
Okay. They don't overlap with dinosaurs at all. They're pre-dinosaurs. They have these big fin backs. And when you look at the skulls, they have the same skull type. And again, I can't remember the name as mammals, and they begin to have differentiated teeth. So you see, for example, canines. And, the question is, there's no continuous record. Well, yeah, to a point. How many fossils do you need to be intermediates? If you're asking for an infinite number of intermediates with an infinitely small grade between each one, you'll never find that. And that's like the old joke, and it's, my creationist friend said, oh, there's no record of a intermediate between apes and man. And I said, oh, there's a beautiful record. There's this brand new fossil right in the middle. And he said, well, now it's twice as bad because there's two gaps. And it's,
Well,
it's just
if
like
I could
the more,
push back,
the more you fill in, yeah, there's always going to be gaps. It's just how big does the morphologic difference have to be?
If the gaps are within major traits, like with the hominins, the hyoid, or we can look at certain aspects of you might not see the specific design of the hyoid in Australopithecines, extanates, and humans as being major, but it really is. The specific design of our hyoid gives us the ability to do what we're doing now. And I think it's interesting that what we find in terms of the hyoid bone with extant apes like chimpanzees, that's also what we find with Australopithecines, with no clear transition going from a hyoid not built for sophisticated speech to a hyoid built for speech. And those are the kinds of discontinuities that baraminologists are talking about. And my pushback would be directly from this article with Dr. McLean. He says, instead, most groups appear suddenly. So that's key. It's not that, well, it's just like that there's these little gaps here and there. No, it's that these groups, like the therapsids or Dinosauria, you can name it, they're appearing suddenly in the fossil record, already possessing their unique traits. And I also find it interesting because creationists like Dr. McLean, Dr. Todd Wood, they're a little more generous to the evolutionist side. I'm sure you're familiar. Todd Wood, he's famous for his article that says evolution, a theory not in crisis. So that group wouldn't even attack evolution as aggressively as we would, but even they're admitting that, wow, we find these tremendous discontinuities in these fossil groups. And if they didn't, if those didn't exist, then it's not like they would just make that up. I mean, already they're complementary a little bit to the evolution model, and yet they're pointing out their research. I said a lot there, Howard. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's true. It's absolutely true that most fossil groups appear suddenly, and we don't see the transitions between major groups. There's a few exceptions, but it's not like this evidence is static. There's new fossils being found all the time. And before I answer questions, I want to get back to the petroleum because I don't want to let that drop.
Well, I can answer this. Answer this real quick. Are those new fossil discoveries filling in those gaps we're talking about?
Oh yeah, and so there's a great example from ceratopsian dinosaurs. So ceratopsians are the ones that include Triceratops.
Right.
And the earliest ceratopsians are very small animals from China. And 20 years ago, there were huge gaps in that succession. And now there are many fewer. There's maybe one sort of gap in that succession, and the rest has been filled in. And that's all in the last 20 years. So this is all ongoing. I mean, the discovery of Cambrian fish just happened 10 years ago. Before 10 years there was not a single Cambrian fish. They just appeared abruptly in the early Ordovician. And
when it comes to ceratopsians, what's there to fill in? I mean, we have a lot of variation within what we would probably say are all related, these Triceratops like creatures. What kind of gaps are you saying? Because we're talking about major discontinuities between traits of significant value. But if you're saying, well, within the ceratopsians,
then I'll go to the rhapsid system.
Okay.
There's in the last 15-20 years there's been a huge number of fossils found that has been filling in the gaps in that system. That doesn't mean that today everything is filled in, but it's getting better, and it's going in the direction that
is it getting better though, Howard?
It's
your claim, but is it really getting better?
Yeah, it is.
I don't see that. I mean,
I
study hominins, and I'm not seeing.
Well,
it's kind of like you said earlier.
You keep referring to areas that I'm not saying aren't valid. They're just areas where I'm not familiar with what's going on.
But then a creationist could say the same thing. And I'm not saying I'm unfamiliar with mammal-like reptiles. Clearly, I'm giving you some answers. But a creationist could say the same thing. They could say, Dr. Feldman, what you're pointing to with therapsids, that's not my area expertise. So at that point, who do we trust?
Those are valid points.
Well,
so
let
me go back to petroleum.
You wouldn't accept that. Well, real quick, and we're not going to leave petroleum because I want to get on that. But
I'll do it.
Dr. Howard, if you were sick and a doctor says, hey, well, I want you to try this medicine. It's not been tested on anyone yet. How would you feel? Would you feel confident, high confidence, or low confidence in this new medicine? What would you think?
It's not been tested on anyone. I probably wouldn't take it.
Okay, so you acknowledge that there's a difference between high confidence and low confidence science.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great. So when you just pointed to dinosaurs in those types of fossils that we find in the geological column, high confidence science would say that we cannot justify these soft fibrous tissues that we're finding now in all of them. High confidence science have established the decay rates of which these things break down. So when you go to the geological column and you say, well, we're finding all of this neat stuff, and you point to dinosaur bones that are just now littered with soft tissues everywhere. I mean, they're saying now, you show me a bone, I'll slice it, I'll put the bone in an acid and dissolve the permineralization, and I'm going to find soft tissue in there. On your paradigm, that's a huge problem. So I'm pretty sure you just pointed to a fantastic line of high confidence science that would support our position over yours and cause us to believe that you are in fact misinterpreting the geological record. What would you
Yeah,
have
so
to
the
say?
soft tissue discovery was pretty surprising, to say the least, and it was a big discovery, and it is not fully explained. But the lack of an explanation isn't to say that there can't be an explanation.
It's a
It's
gap
the
chart.
as far as I know, of all the discoveries in taphonomy and in paleontology and geology, it's the only one. That's it. That
Yeah, well, no, that's
know,
actually that. So, and this is again, I'm gonna challenge you on your use of language. I think that your vocabulary is very uncharitable, and I think that your vocabulary that you use when you talk about these things, I think you could do a little bit better. And so, no, that's not it. I mean, Donnie just got done giving you all kinds of arguments left and right, arguments from genetics, which is high quality. I've given you an argument now for decay rates of soft tissue, which is well established.
And look at this,
high
Sam, to
quality.
support
We
what
got
you're saying.
evidence up and down, and so it seems like when we press you on the high quality lines of evidence, I want to thank you for making that distinction. It seems like you just give us a gaps argument, but then to turn around and say that all the evidence somehow supports what you believe, I think that's just a reckless statement. So I'd like to just call you out on that.
I'm not. I think you're distorting what I'm saying, and there is lots of evidence for specific sets of conditions that collagen doesn't last very long, but that every one of those experiments is only for that one narrow set of conditions.
Yeah, no,
well,
so
Howard,
actually,
I just and Sam, I want you to continue, but I just want to show for the audience sake, this paper here from last year, Sam, as you're familiar with, we had Dr. Brian Thomas speak at our conference last year. He's an author of this paper, writing the conventional literature, evidence for endogenous collagen and Montosaurus fossil bone. And Sam and I, we were discussing earlier a seminar that we did with Dr. Joel Brown from the Creation Research Society, where they did several analyses. They ran some experiments to see how long, even in the best possible conditions, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, and the longest you can get collagen to last in the best case conditions or scenarios with the evolutionary model is 500,000 years. But they're finding this kind of collagen in fossils that are claimed to be millions of years old. And so doesn't that contradict the deep time?
Tens of millions, hundreds of millions. Yeah.
Right. So, so if at best you get 500,000 years, and for the audience sake, when they like to say, oh, creationists don't publish, I mean, here's one of many. Right here's powerful evidence that says, wait a minute, we really need to rethink these claims of deep time.
Well, I'd have to. I haven't read that paper, and I'd be willing to read it, but it's hard for me to comment on a paper I haven't read.
Well, my only point.
I want to get back to petroleum since you brought that up.
Yeah, no, I want to. We can get on that right now. But my only point in calling you out is that when you come up to this panel and you use words like, "Well, I don't think we can trust you guys, and you guys are dishonest, and you don't have any evidence," but then when we make that you actually make the distinction between high quality science and low confidence science, and every time we point to a high quality line, you don't have a response, and that's all we're just spoon force feeding you all of these lines of evidence for you to turn around and say, well, there's no evidence. It seems, with all respect, Dr. Howard, that you're the one that we can't trust, because you're the one who's not being honest both with us on this panel, and actually more concerning is intellectually honest with yourself. So I mean, if you want to respond to that, you can, but that's the second time that I've challenged you on the language that you're using. If I were to tell
all I've said is I can't evaluate a paper I haven't read, and I can't evaluate science where I don't have expertise. It's not that I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I don't have the expertise to evaluate it. If you want to talk about petroleum, this is something I've been doing for 30 years. I'm happy to talk about that.
Yeah. So the question that I have, so I've got, I don't.
It'd be good if you reiterate it. Just to bring
no problem. And so I'll admit that I need to work on putting slides, and I don't have all of that database that you guys do. But you can go online here. So the argument here is that you could assign a letter to the geological layers and not a number. The number really doesn't matter when it comes to finding oil. I've heard you repeat this talking point now multiple times, that it matters. And so I would just ask you, so this article says specific numeric or relative age of an individual geological layer is generally irrelevant to oil discovery because hydrocarbons are found by targeting physical rock properties and the permeability rather than the time period in which the rocks were formed. That's the point that David McQueen made numerous times. That was his field, and he was a geologist, and he worked for the U.S. Geological Survey. And we've refuted this point numerous times. And so I'm asking you now, if the layering was represented with letters instead of numbers, how would that affect the discovery of oil?
Well, in some cases it would, in some cases it wouldn't. So there are places where we we use seismic as a tool to investigate oil, and this is something I've been doing for the last decades. And there are cases where you can see what we call direct hydrocarbon indicators. And so there, we don't really care about the age, because if you can actually image the oil reservoir, it gives you high confidence. You still can be wrong. There are various reasons, technical reasons why that might not work. But there are other places where the imaging isn't very clear. And as we go around the world, the easy stuff has pretty much been drilled. And so you're going after more and more difficult stuff. And so there, the age does really matter for a number of reasons. One is that if things are deposited too rapidly, you get what's called overpressure shales, which are very expensive to drill. And so the actual number of years then starts to matter. Second, when you go after
described a process. You just described a process by which something like a mechanistic state of events that has nothing to do with your attitude towards that state of affairs, the time. So you're just saying that, hey, well, if there's this mechanistic process that results with a certain layer of hardness, that has nothing to do with your assessment of the age.
You misunderstood me. So, when I talked about overpressure shales, you can't get overpressure shales through slow deposition. You can only get them through rapid deposition. And so then the absolute number of years matters. So if we have normal slow deposition, say a few millimeters per year, you don't get overpressured shales, but if it's much higher, you do. So that's just one example. Another example is...
Could you be wrong about that? Could you be wrong about that?
It's possible, but this has been, pretty well established.
Well, let me push back on that. So, there was a time where your camp would say that the only way that oil is created is through these slow, gradual processes. Said the same thing about diamonds, gold, you name it, stalactites.
Well, I don't know anything about diamonds or gold, but for oil, that's certainly true.
Well, no, actually, you can go and you can find articles. In fact, the Z-pinch experiments in a laboratory where they zapped, I don't know the composition of the soil with high volts of energy, created these elements in the ratios that we find them in the earth. You can actually create oil right now very fast yourself. And so again, the 2 points here, Dr. Howard. One point is that, again, you should remove words like truth and fact from your vocabulary because all conclusions within your paradigm are provisional. And the second point is that if it's the case that you could be wrong about it, then you've conceded that you would just be misunderstanding the age assignment. Because all you've done is invoked a process. That process could happen, right? And according to you, last point. According to you, when I asked you about the uniformity of nature being a foundational precondition, you said, well, no, as long as there isn't a violation in the laws of physics. Well, if that is your only criteria, then if processes are accelerated or decelerated, whatever that might look like, as long as they don't violate any laws, which you couldn't justify anyway, but as long as they don't violate any of those laws, then you can't really say that these processes took time. You're just invoking mechanistic processes.
So you keep interrupting me and not letting me finish. So, it's true. Oil can be created in a lab very quickly, but so what? A bicycle can be created in a lab very quickly. It doesn't mean it occurs in nature very quickly or at all. And so, the fact that it can happen quickly, the problem in getting oil to form quickly is two things. One is some oil comes from terrestrial plants, but most oil comes from algae. And getting algae to be concentrated in what we call source rock, there is no way for that to happen rapidly. It has to happen slowly. We understand the geochemistry of how that happens. We understand the sedimentology of how that happens. And so there's no sorting mechanism that's going to get these widespread source rocks to be deposited. And to get that to happen, that requires slow deposition. A second point is that has to then be heated up. And the problem is, let me finish.
Yeah, you're just saying a lot of points though.
So then that has to be heated up to crack the algae into oil. And so as that system gets buried, the heat is propagating up from below, essentially from the mantle up through these rocks. We know how fast heat propagates. There's no way to get it to go faster. There's no mechanism there. We know how every time we drill a exploration well, they almost always measure the temperature at the bottom. So we have a really good model of what the temperature distribution is in the rocks. And so we are really good at using, standard geologic models of how isostatic subsidence happens. That is, you pile more weight on the seafloor. That sediment then pushes down the seafloor, displacing mantle. And if you do that over millions of years, you'll get the source rock into what we call the oil window. And then that is a really good predictor of whether that source rock is going to expel oil. And so evidence. Let me finish. You asked me a question.
I will. I'm going to jump in, Howard, because we have limited time here. We actually said we were going 90 minutes. We're at 2 hours, so we're in bonus minutes. I would prefer a free-flowing discussion. I understand some of these technical points require longer answers, but you have been talking for a couple minutes. I mean, there is stuff to address there. So allow Sam to respond.
I apologize. I try not to interrupt, and we've both been interrupting a little bit. But I wanted to interrupt you because you invoke you're committing a categorical error, because I asked you about the process of extracting the oil, and you're talking about your assumptions about how the oil was created. See, so regardless of how the oil is created, that would be in one category. That has no bearing on whether or not you could just alphabetize each layer and identify them that way, which was the category that I asked you to address.
Well, yes, it does. Can I explain really quickly?
Interestingly enough, when you said that algae is the main form of oil, I mean, you've described to me what sounds like a fantastic global hydrological event that would bury mass algae or organic materials deep down into the earth, and then slowly sedimentize over them. And again, you said that as long as the laws of physics are not violated, then that's all you care about. So again, the timeline by which these things happen, according to you, can be fast or can be slow, as long as they don't violate those laws of physics that you could never justify when we talked anyway. So
really quickly, where I was about to go is, if you can't get those source rocks that have the high organic content buried into the oil window, and that takes a long time, then you can't generate oil. And so then there's nothing to look for. So it absolutely does have an impact on where we drill. So nobody is going to drill in a virgin basin if they can't produce a story, or at least a series of events that gets a high organic rich shale down into the oil window for temperature, and then have a migration pathway to get to the reservoir. So these are all linked together to exactly address your point.
No, they're not. So I actually literally just pointed out that you're making a categorical error, and I explained why. You could be wrong about the assumption of the time it takes to create the oil. But even if I were to grant you that, let's just say that I grant you that process and that timeline, okay? We could still alphabetize the layers that we find them in, because again, we're looking for certain objects that are found within those layers, call them contaminants or whatever it might be when they drill down. So you've made a categorical error. You could be right about the millions of years for the sake of argument. You could be wrong about it. According to you, as long as it doesn't violate the laws of physics, which you could never justify anyway, and it wouldn't if these processes happen fast. If you are wrong about the way that these processes occur, and I've given you numerous examples about why you could be, okay, then again, the category I'm asking you is extracting the oil. So you've not shown me why the layers cannot be alphabetized. You have not shown me why these deep time assumptions are necessarily need to be applied to these layers to find the oil. You've not done that.
Well, I'll give you another example then. Maybe this will work. I mean, we don't really talk about numerical ages very much in the oil business. We talk about Cretaceous or Ordovician, and we talk about then the divisions within the Cretaceous, like the Albian or Aptian. But if you're one of the big mistakes that's been made, for example, is looking for, say, a Jurassic source rock, which we know is common in many areas. But if the continents were together in the Jurassic, so there was no ocean there, then there can't be a Jurassic source rock. And so looking for it is fruitless. And so there's how we're integrating plate tectonics and burial history and the evolution of that system to generate oil.
Again, I mean, I think whether you realize it or not, you just kind of conceded the point here is that you don't typically refer to these layers by the age, but just by the name. So whether you just use a letter to represent them, it's the processes that we use to extract the oil. It has nothing to do with the age assignment of the individual layer. Yeah, you have this other category over here where you have this methodology or that you would invoke by which these layers are created. But you continue to use this talking point that's refuted and that you were not able to defend now right here tonight, that is that process or those age assumptions are necessary for extracting the oil. Now,
there's two things that you're conflating here, and it's probably my fault for not explaining it correctly. One is oil exploration, where you're just looking for a new field. And the other is oil production, where the field has already been discovered and you're just drilling more holes to get as much oil out as possible with at least expense as possible. So if you're talking about production after the oil is discovered, yeah, the ages don't really matter that much. But if you're talking about rank exploration, as going to a place where there's no oil well drilled for several hundred kilometers, then the ages matter a lot. And we really care about the evolution of that system and how the oil was generated, how long it took to get buried, how it got into the oil window, when was the oil released, what was the pathway, where were the deposits deposited at that time, and how did the traps occur? And so then the ages become critically important.
That's a category error again.
No.
I've already explained.
I mean, I'm basing my statement on 30 years experience doing this.
Do you know what a category error is?
Do
you know what a categorical error is?
I do.
Yeah, you're making a categorical error again by you are describing certain processes by which you evaluate the age of the layer. But if we were to say, let's just grant it, okay? Are you trying to say, like, let's just grant that, and let's say that you realized tomorrow that you were wrong about one of these layers. Are you saying that you wouldn't be able to find oil there anymore? No, of course not. Because again, that the assignment value of these layers is in a different category than the methodologies which we use to extract the oil.
That is categorically false. That is just as false as it can be based on my decades of experience of actually doing this.
You've not
if
been able
you're-
to answer the question without making that without
Okay, so
conflating those
yeah, if you
categories.
when we get there have been examples where we get the age wrong, and you drill a dry well, and you get the biostratigraphy, and you realize that the biostratigraphy says it's a different age than we thought, and the result was we spent a few $100 million and drilled a dry well.
So
So it
you
absolutely
misidentified the
matters.
layer because, like you even said, you typically don't refer to the ages of the layer. So you would have,
But we use that, and we don't
misidentified-
refer to it, but we use that information for sure.
Right. Well, you could call the layer Jablue. It doesn't really
It
matter
doesn't
what you
matter.
call it. The age of the layer is in a different category. I mean, you conceded that point already. I think it's just kind of weird that you want to press it. I
know. I know how oil
oil.
exploration works, and it's hard for me to describe it in a few minutes. But the age of the system, the burial history of that system, it's called basin analysis, and how that system gets buried, and as it gets buried, it heats up, and how that heating occurs, how long it takes to occur, and how much oil is extracted, all depends on numerical ages. Now, we don't actually use the terms numerical ages when we're doing all this. We talk about Albion and Aptian and whatever. And so, but the numerical ages for oil exploration absolutely are critical. For oil production, less so.
So last question. So let's just say that that it turns out that you're wrong about the way, so for example, let's go back to that high quality line of evidence that we argued within the Jurassic layer, which is one of your oldest layers, that we find these soft fibrous tissues in those bones. And
No, they go back to Permian now. Well,
let's just say that. Well, so we have a prediction on the table currently. Well, actually, look, I mean, we can keep beating this up and arguing over it, but this would just be like a thought experiment. Like, let's just say that your paradigm, that the consensus now shifts on your paradigm, and they believe that it's false, that they believe that, I don't know, some state of affairs that's different. Another a Copernican revolution takes place. Just like when we observe the red shift, and they're like, well, hold on a minute, this kind of changes the way everything, the shift between the heliocentric and the geocentric model. Let's say that you have some sort of geological paradigm shift. Okay. That would not affect the way that we discover oil. Right. So if what you're saying is true, then the conclusion of your argument would be that, well, if we had to reevaluate and reassign the arbitrary age of these certain layers, then we would never be able to find oil again. But I'm not sure how many people would agree with that.
Well, it certainly would affect the way we look for oil. Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
I don't know how it wouldn't.
So then my last question, because I know these other guys are chomping to get in, and thank you for coming up and talking, because I don't think we were going to get anyone. So I have enjoyed this very much.
Yeah.
Let's
Howard, I hope you join future ones. I always enjoy. And Howard, I want to dedicate an entire program, hopefully, to discussing your points on river channels and paleosols.
I'd love that.
All that fun stuff.
I'd love that.
So there is a current biblical creation prediction right now that's on the books, and I wonder how you would respond should this prediction be fulfilled. And so this prediction is in the same way that we find these soft fibrous genetic elements within the dinosaur bones, that they are going to find them in trilobites.
Well, so far, no one has found, as far as I know. So I'm think I'm right in this. I hope I'm right. As far as I know, no one has found original organic compounds in trilobites. I think
Correct.
That's true. No, certainly no one's found like soft. When they say there's soft tissue found in trilobites, what they really mean is there's mineralized impressions of soft tissue, not that it's actually still soft. And so I don't see how. I'm not sure about the genetic thing you were talking about, but I don't see how it would be possible to find. Maybe somebody's going to find some organic soft tissue in trilobites, but None
Now,
has
would
been
that be
found so far.
consistent? Right, right. Well, that's the point, that this is a novel prediction. This is something that's okay. That's
I mean, organic compounds can last a long time. I've seen arguments that oil can't last, and that's just categorically false. There's no problem with preserving oil for hundreds of millions of years. It doesn't break down if the conditions are right.
right. But would that be consistent with the way that you're interpreting the physical world?
In what, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Well, in the same way that when Mary Schweitzer found that those soft tissues in the dinosaur bones, I mean, your camp lost their minds, right? For us, we're like, wow,
I'm not sure that's true, but
well, I mean, it is true. We can say that.
It
right?
was very surprising. But then it turned out that people had found the same thing in the 60s, and it just hadn't gotten a lot of notoriety. And I think, Joel Duff has a lot of videos on this, and I think he does a pretty good job of describing it.
But the point there is that they were surprised because it shouldn't be there. If your interpretation,
that was the first impression for sure.
Yeah. As we start to wind down, I do want to get this in here. It's been a good discussion. Dr. Feldman, I'm glad you joined. We did start. I see some comments from Andrew coming. Andrew, hopefully you can join our next open mic potentially tomorrow night. But
what's the topic?
Thursday. Well, it'll probably, I think we're going to continue along the lines of biological evolution, but like tonight, if we don't get any challengers on that, Dr. Feldman, we'll shift into some of the geology and paleontology like we're discussing here today. And I'll keep you posted, Howard. So I'm curious if an appeal to oil as evidence for deep time and making predictions on where oil can be found is based on the assumptions of the geologic column and the rock strata. How do you account for measurable radiocarbon that we find reported in other conventionally ancient carbon-bearing materials like coal? And then we've been discussing the dinosaur soft tissue and the collagen, and we presented the paper earlier from Brian Thomas. So we also find C14 in these dinosaur fossil samples. And so my argument is, while given the 5,730-year half-life of C14, should we be finding this level of C14 in coal and dinosaur fossils, Howard?
So a long time ago, I actually did use a mass spec for some work, and I understand a little bit about how they work. So the first thing is that it is impossible for a mass spec, which is how some people think they measure C14 by like a Geiger counter or something, and they don't do that. It's a mass spec that separates C12 from C14. It is impossible for a mass spec to measure zero of anything. It cannot determine that there's no of whatever it is you're measuring, no matter what isotope you're measuring. So no matter whether there's no C14 in the sample or not, it'll always deliver a positive number. Always. There's no physical way that it can't. And so when you detect C14 in something, that doesn't mean there is C14 in that. And then it gets down to what is detectable, what is the background noise. And so, I've read a few of these papers on diamonds, and they all say that this is just to determine what the background noise is, and it doesn't indicate that there's actual C14.
Well, I understand on diamonds, and I appreciate what you're saying. Diamonds is a good question because we do find the C14, and diamonds is this background noise, and that's debated for sure. But that's why I focus on coal and dinosaur fossils, because the carbon 14 levels detected in these samples are well above the instrument's background noise, meaning they represent a real measurable signal. And I had Dr. Jay Weil on. He's a PhD nuclear chemist, to speak on this and speak on his research and work. And he pointed out the same thing about the diamonds, Dr. Feldman. So I appreciate that. But then he talked about the dinosaur fossils in the coal, and know that the same thing that you're attributing to diamonds cannot be attributed to dinosaur fossils because of the amount that we find.
Right. So with dinosaur,
real.
Yeah. So with dinosaur fossils, if they've been exposed to the rain for 1,000 years, and rainwater has dissolved carbon dioxide in it, so it's just slightly acidic, and then the carbon molecules in the rainwater can can switch with some of the carbon that is in the dinosaur bone. And so after a few thousand years of being exposed to the weather or being exposed to groundwater or exposed to rainwater that's percolating through, it's hopelessly contaminated. There's nothing you can do to uncontaminate it. The carbon at a molecular level has exchanged with the carbon.
Are you saying it's due to environmental contamination?
Sure. Yeah. It's just rainwater. From what I understand, this isn't my area of expertise, but this is what I understand. Yeah. So that's why in systems that have been exposed to rainwater, the contamination is basically hopeless.
Okay, but if it's all environmental contamination, why do we find such uniformity in the amount of C14 that we're finding across dinosaur fossils? Coal and other samples? You'd think it'd be more random, would it? Because if it's just
the data that I've seen shows a huge range of values, not uniformity.
Well, a huge range of values that's one above the background noise, but secondly, the amount that one might expect to find if these dinosaur fossils are not millions of years. Have you actually, has it been demonstrated this is for sure due to environmental contamination? Because we're finding C14 in these samples at different levels. I mean, you'd have to look to see how random it really is to see if what you're saying is.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those data, so I can't comment on them.
Okay, now, if it could be shown to you that the C14 in the dinosaur fossils is not due to contamination, I think you've already agreed that it is above background noise, so it is legit, but due to if we could show you that it's not due to contamination, that doesn't work, it's legit C14, would that make you question the deep time model, or would you go looking for another rescue device?
Well, I'd want to see that. I'm not going to speak to a hypothetical. I'd want to see that evidence. And so far, I've read a few papers on this, not a lot, but I've read a few papers on this, and I'm not convinced. The samples seem always to come from dinosaur bones that were laying on the ground or of unknown origin. It's not known what their history is, exactly where they were found, exactly what the situation was, how long they were exposed.
Well, here's what I put based on a number of talks that I've had with PhD scientists, including Dr. Andrew Snelling, who I'm sure you're very fond of, Dr. Tim Clary, Dr. Jay Weil. I mean, a lot of PhD scientists have looked into this. And on the environmental contamination issue, I have here as a response, the argument collapses under the weight of consistency. Environmental contamination, if real, should be random and irregular. Seems like you're claiming that it is, but I think we'd have to demonstrate that. Affecting some samples heavily and others minimally. Yet carbon-14, here's the powerful point to me. Carbon-14 levels are found in virtually every sample tested. Coal, fossil wood, oil, carbonates, and diamonds. And I know you're contesting the diamonds one. All yielding C14 C ratios far above detection thresholds, but remarkably similar in magnitude. Here's the point I want to bring in, okay? Howard, this is the C14 issue. But during tonight's open mic, I also brought up the mutation rate issue. We brought up the dinosaur soft tissue and collagen. And so we're looking at many independent lines of evidence. And as young Earth creationists and proponents of separate ancestry, we're arguing that these many independent lines of evidence corroborate on one conclusion, that separate ancestry is true, as in humans are not related to chimpanzees, and the Earth is not as old as has been claimed. So it's not just one or two. I mean, we're focusing on many different arguments here, Dr. Feldman.
Well, again, you are focusing on many different arguments, but every time those arguments intersect an area where I have expertise, they're wrong. They're just.
Well, what about the C14? I mean, you said you studied it a little bit.
I have a tiny bit of expertise, but I'll give you one example. I read one of Dr. Snelling's articles on C14 was found in diamonds, and then I actually read the article that he was basing it on, and that is not at all what the author said. He said the author said this and this, and the quotes were accurate, but they were taken out of context, and they did not reflect what the author was actually intending. And so that doesn't give me a lot of confidence that he's repeating the data faithfully.
So are you referring to the actual science in the article, or are you
Or the conclusion.
referring to the conclusion by the author?
Right.
I'm
Because those are
referring to the
two different
way
things.
that
Like,
Dr.
so this
Snelling.
happened with
I'm
Mary
referring to the
Schweitzer
way
all the time.
I'm
It's
referring to the way
repeated where-
Guys, you're over talking here. Howard, you finish your thoughts.
Yeah,
Sam,
go
we'll
ahead.
back
Go
to
ahead.
you.
I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
I'm referring to the way Dr. Snelling characterized the author's conclusions. They
Yeah,
were
so
not true.
that's subjective. That's not the data. I mean, this is the common talking point. And I mean, really, you should know better. Like, there's a difference between the fact and the interpretation of it. So, you know, Mary Schweitzer is a great example. Mary Schweitzer showed that there was, in fact, soft tissue in the dinosaur bones. Her conclusion was that, well, maybe this, maybe that. But again, that would be a categorical error. So to say that, you know, like Dr. Snelling cited a paper, but he disagreed with the conclusion. Well, yeah, obviously.
That's the point.
Yeah, obviously.
No, that is mischaracterizing
You got
what
to
I
deal with
said.
the data, though.
I'm not saying he disagreed with the conclusion. I'm saying he claimed he agreed with the author's conclusion, but he misused quotes to make the author say what the author clearly did not intend.
Well, we'd have to examine that exact paper. And we've had Dr. Snelling on for a 3-hour seminar, and I find it hard to believe. I think we'd have to, again, examine the exact paper, which quotes he's looking at, the excerpt, because I know from my field and my area of expertise, I get this. And why I'm pointing this out, Dr. Feldman, is because I get the same accusations from evolutionists when I point out, for example, papers on mutation rate studies where right in the paper they say, okay, if we take the empirical rate, the observed pedigree rate, we get 6,500 years. For example, Ann Gibbons, I really want to show this, Calibrating the Mitochondrial Clock. She did a commentary on the Parsons paper, and she said, and she's an evolutionist, and she said, regardless of the cause, evolutionists. Isn't that funny, Howard? That, because I'm not saying you do, but some evolutionists will be like, don't call us evolutionists. You lose credibility. We're not called I mean, Ann Gibbons is literally an evolutionist, calling herself and her camp evolutionists. But she says, for example, researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve, the woman whose mtDNA was ancestral to that, and all living people lived 100 to 200,000 years ago, right? Because that's what they believe. That's the starting point. No one's saying otherwise. Yeah, these authors do believe that for sure. No doubt. They believe in deep time and evolution. But then she says, using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. So the point I'm trying to make is we have the data that's in these papers, and it's like, wow, here's the real-time data. And if we interpret it for what it's saying, Eve lived 6,000 years, but then you'll have evolutionists come along and say, yeah, but that's not the conclusions of the evolutionists or the authors. They reject young earth creation. So you're misrepresenting them and you have different conclusions. But that's the whole point, is we're debating the data. What does the data say?
No, I'm not.
Of course,
I'm
we
not
disagree.
saying that Dr. Snelling had different conclusions from the author. I'm saying he misrepresented the author's position, and that is dishonest. And the other big difference, Donnie, between the way you present data and the way he does, you know, I watched one of his presentations one time, and he went on for an hour with all this data and not a single citation of where it came from. And without that, and you said, well, it's in his papers. Yeah, but it's impossible to track down. You know, every time I showed a slide with data when you invited me on very graciously, I showed the citation of where that data came from. And he doesn't. And it makes it very difficult to actually track down and verify that what he's saying is true. It may well be, but it's impossible to track down. And, you know, and that's very different from the way you do it, where you show the full citation. You're saying, here's the citation so you can look it up yourself. That's certainly not what he does.
Well, wait a minute. You said two things. So you said he's dishonest, but then you said that he doesn't show citations, so you can't track it down. But if he doesn't show citations and you can't track it down, then you can't say that he's dishonest. So which is it?
I'm saying
he's dishonest, or you can't track it down.
No, it's two different situations. So one where I tracked it down was from an article he wrote, where I read his article and then I read the paper, and he mischaracterized what the author claimed. That's one example. And then the other thing I'm talking about is when he gave a presentation in Standing for the Truth, and he gave a very long presentation without citing a single paper. He just said, oh, here's data that disproves it. Here's data that disproves it, without citing where it came from. So it makes it just about impossible to track down. So those are two completely separate situations.
Howard, one last point, since I saw a little bit of silence there, so nobody, right? And us too. This has been fun. We literally say, I remember we said we're going 90 minutes, well, we're an hour over. My goal is hopefully an open mic within the next 2 days. We'll start a little bit early so we can get more variety for sure. But this has been great. Firstly, we're going to be doing a seminar in August with Mike Ord, Dr. Feldman. So if there's anything you want Mike to,
what date?
He's still picking a date. I'll keep you posted in email, because if there's certain things that you would like to see addressed,
I've got some very serious family obligations that end August 18th.
Okay, no worry. I'll consider that. But secondly, are you familiar with from the RAPE project? Because we've discussed the dinosaur soft tissue, the mutation rates.
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. So because as we've said, we like to take many independent lines of evidence. So, C14, soft tissue, mutation rates, genetic entropy, helium and zircon crystals. What are your overall thoughts on the work that Dr. Russell Humphreys has done, where he said, okay, we have these zircon crystals that are claimed to be billions of years old. Uranium decays into lead very slowly, but helium is very slippery. So it should have essentially left the zircon crystals, escaped into the atmosphere, the most of it. And so they made the prediction ahead of time. The RAPE project took place. They took these zircons, analyzed, and they found an abundance of helium that if uranium was decaying into lead for billions of years, there should only been trace amounts of helium, because you're still having, that process from uranium to lead. So it's going to produce a little bit of helium, of course, but the amount that they found was more consistent with, and as Dr. Humphreys put in his paper, 6,000 to 10,000 years. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that.
That's just not a topic I have any knowledge of. I just can't comment on. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I don't have any way to evaluate it. But I would be happy to have a debate with Mr. Ord anytime, because I've seen many statements that he's made that are absolutely false.
Well, let's say, for sake of argument, the helium found in zircon crystals is not false, just like with the dinosaur soft tissue.
I just don't know enough about it. You're asking me to comment on hypotheticals, and I'm not going to get dragged into that discussion.
It's because I'm wondering what would it take to convince you deep time is wrong, because if you're always just going to pivot to, well, that's not my area of, and I do appreciate that you're saying that.
What it would take, I'll tell you what it would take. Show me an alternative model that gets all these river valleys into the rock record. Show me an alternative model that gets all these soils.
So it comes down to the river valleys, you're saying? It comes down to the river valleys for you.
Yeah, well, this is the area that I know, and I've published on this. I've worked the examples. I understand how river valleys in the ancient work. And so I also understand how coral reefs, show me an alternative model to get coral reefs in the rock record that would work in young time. These are the kinds of things that would convince me. Show me an alternative model.
Well, what's your quick
facts?
Well, what's your quick response? Because I'm still slightly confused, because flood geology, whether CPT or HPT, predicts localized erosion and channel formation. Powerful currents during the flood, during repeated depositional pulses, would naturally carve channels before later sediments basically fill and preserve them. So yeah, I could agree with you that these channels exist, but the issue is whether they uniquely require prolonged landscape stability, which is what I'm trying to see is the necessary position. How would you respond to that?
Because the sedimentology of the deposits places upper limits on how fast the water could be moving, how deep the water was. And so you can demonstrate with these valleys, at least some of the valleys I've worked on, that the water was flowing at the rates that modern rivers flow, and that it couldn't have been deeper than the valley is high. So in other words, the edges of the valley had to be exposed. And we see soils with insect burrows, which means you have to wait for the soil to dry out. The insects have to come in. They have to do their burrowing.
Yeah, but during the
thing.
flood, you'd have those moments where those sediments are briefly exposed. You could have animals come in, you could have burrows, dinosaurs lay their eggs, and then the water comes back in.
Where'd the dinosaurs come from? If
Well,
the area, if the
it's
area
not like
was
they're all just
submerged.
buried at the same time. Boom, flood hits, they all drown. I think
Well,
some people
let
think
me
the
give you
whole
one
Earth was covered
let me-
equally at the same time.
Well, let me give you one example. So, if you look at the Devonian is one of the times when we have the most laterally extensive marine horizons. You know, it's just about as extensive as it ever gets in North America. And yet, on top of that, we have a lot of dinosaur footprints. Almost everywhere I know of in North America where there's dinosaur footprints, if you drill down, you find Devonian marine rocks. So when the Devonian was flooding not all, but most of North America, where were the dinosaurs? Where physically were they that they could leave their footprints that are now, 1,000 kilometers in some cases from the nearest shoreline in the Devonian? Were they swimming? Where were they?
Well, I think it assumes, and Sam, feel free to say something as we start to wind down here, because I know we could discuss this for 2 hours. But again, I think it assumes that the entire Earth was just equally covered in water and everything drowned all at the same time. I mean, this was a multi-dimensional event with a lot going on during that year, where you'd have areas of the planet that are not necessarily covered in water, and the sediments would be exposed. Dinosaurs would come in, leave their footprints.
From where? Come
Water
in
comes
from
in.
where?
What do you mean come in from where? I mean, they're existing they're running from the floodwaters, hiding in certain
Well,
areas.
but I'm saying that in the Devonian, you can show that there are places where you have dinosaur footprints where there's such laterally extensive marine deposits. They would have had to have been 1,000 kilometers away. And there's just not time for them to walk into this area or even run in that short a period of time. So you've got.
Are you saying they're washed in from 1,000 kilometers away?
I'm
They
saying
drowned and were
no.
kind of
I'm
tough to move?
saying there's deep time and they evolved gradually. But you're saying that. So if we look at a map of the Devonian, and I had this discussion with my in the video I did with Rebecca on examining origins. If you look at the lateral extent of the Devonian marine rocks, it covers not all of North America, but a good part of North America. And then you can find areas where there's dinosaur footprints, so we know they were walking around. And yet the nearest in the Devonian, the nearest land would have been 1,000 kilometers away. So how did the dinosaurs get there in your time frame? Just to say, oh, they washed in. Well, that's not really an answer.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just trying to fully understand.
So the question is, how did the dinosaurs get there? Like where in the Devonian, like point to me on a map. Like,
Are these Devonian? Right. So you're saying are these Devonian tetrapod trackways? Or
no, I'm saying, well, there's no, I'm saying that the Devonian marine deposits are very widespread in North America. That's element one. And then you stack sediment on top of it and you get dinosaurs up here in say the Jurassic. But where were the dinosaurs physically located in the Devonian? Like the land area isn't that big. They would have had to have been 1,000 kilometers away, and somehow they got in the to leave their footprints in the Jurassic.
Aren't you reconstructing that shoreline though? I mean, you're saying the nearest land is 1,000 kilometers away. Isn't that dependent upon your assumptions of the paleogeographic reconstruction of this whole area?
No, it's based on the reconstructions of specific deposits. Like looking, where you see laterally extensive limestones and laterally extensive marine shales, that's obviously not land.
And then I think if we're going to do a future debate on this, I'm going to have to look into I'm typing everything out.
So it's a lot easier if I can show like specific geologic.
Right. No, I understand, which is why I think it deserves more time, because I would challenge, and I'm sure you'll have a response, the claim that this location was 1,000 kilometers from the nearest land, because under the beds model I'm talking about, rapidly deposited sediments can become briefly exposed or shallow enough basically for track making before burial. And now I understand you're saying, well, but it's 1,000 kilometers from the nearest shoreline, and so how'd they get there? And that's something we'll we'd have to engage. And
Yeah,
so
I can show lots of data on this. It's easier to do with data than with hand waving.
Okay, well, I'll say this. This has been a great open mic. I'm glad that you joined Dr. Feldman, made it more enjoyable. I like the fact we got to discuss a lot of issues that we probably weren't anticipating. Isn't that right, Sam? So I am going to thank all the guests. For those that didn't get a chance to speak, I apologize. Howard, thank you very much. And okay, debate us live. Evolution is false. Sam, we got to discuss many different topics ranging from geology to chemistry to paleontology, genetics, biology. Our real challenge tonight was for challengers across Facebook and YouTube to join, give us their best evidence for why they believe they're related to grass, ladybugs, and pine trees. I don't think we got that evidence. I also don't think we got answers to our challenges involving worldview issues, the transcendental argument that you presented, brother. You did a fantastic job. Why chromosome dissimilarity, mutation rates, DNA function. So many important points that hopefully in future open mics, sooner than later, Andrew, I'm looking at you. You better join. I want to see why you believe you're related to grass. Give us your best evidence. Answer our challenges. Danny Boy, Dan Stern Cardinal, feel free to join one of these as well. So, Sam, over to you, brother. Final words, final thoughts. This was fun.
Yeah, just, thanks for having me. It was fun. I'm kind of disappointed, Donnie, that with all of the critics that we find in the comment sections of across the various platforms, none of them showed up. So that was disappointing. But yeah, I like the last question that you asked, the good doc that was up here. And thank you again for your time. What would it take to convince you? His response is that he pointed to certain interpreted lines of evidence. Let's say that that request was satisfied, he would just move on to something else. And so that's why I think that ultimately the question would be at a worldview level. And so what we would need is for somebody to show up and present a coherent worldview, and I guess satisfy all of those questions that I was discussing earlier. And so our position is that God exists, God is good, and because God is holy, there's going to be a judgment. And we want to make sure that we are in God's grace based off of the things that he has done to make us right with him. And so, again, thanks for having me up. Appreciate everyone that stuck around in the chat and looking forward to the next one.
Amen. This was fun. This was our first in a series. So for those who did join, thank you very much. To the critics on Facebook and YouTube, it's time to step up to the mic. Give us your best evidence. Provide us your best answers to our challenges. We are going to be doing many more of these. Sam, just in the last 2.5 hours, we got to show the biological and genetic reasons why common descent is false. We had the opportunity to discuss fast mutation rates in the mitochondrial chromosome, C14 in dinosaur fossils, diamonds, coal. We got to discuss petroleum. Sam, I didn't know you were a petroleum expert. So good for you, brother. Got some positive feedback in the live chat. Dinosaur soft tissue, collagen as well that has been discovered, helium and zircon crystals. Brother, it is a great time to be a biblical creationist. So, okay. Man. God bless you, Sam. You're a warrior. To the audience, I hope you all had as much fun as I did. Share this around. Critical thinking is important. It's also important that we get out of our scientific echo chambers, enter the debate coliseum, and engage the opposing side, because the evidence is on our side and we need to utilize it in the best way possible, Sam. So God bless. Standing for Truth is signing off.